All statements and opinions expressed by guests of this podcast are not representative of the Orthochat, its host, or its producers, and should not be associated with the podcast unless explicitly stated by the host.
You are listening to the Orthochat by Yanni Katsadas.
Σιγαργατάκησε όλος τη αμαρτία και παρεδόθης τελείως τη ραθυμία της εξαναστήσης σε κείμενο.
Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ ελέησον, 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 Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ ελέησον. Greetings in Christ, brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 59 of the Orthochat. We are here today with Father Patrick Cardine. Father, how are you?
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank God. Father, before we get started, can you start us off with a prayer?
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we ask that you would bless our time together and our conversation. Lord, that you would speak to our hearts and our minds and just fill us with a love for you and for your church and for the kingdom of God. We ask this in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Father, before the interrogation starts, what's going on? What's new?
It's cold. I can tell you that. It's freezing here. So
No
we're
joke.
having a winter blast, and we're all walking around the house wrapped up in wool blankets because our heat pump only gets about 60 degrees in the
That
house.
stinks. You guys still got any space heaters?
Yeah, but I don't know,
The
suffering is
fire
good,
thing,
right?
yeah, they're scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, we're doing good. It's a cold winter. Church is doing well. I'm getting over the dreaded unpleasant disease of recent times.
Oh my goodness. Have you
So
even seen this? The neurovirus, the stomach bug's been going around.
yeah, no, I've got the old COVID thing, but I'm on the mend now, so the worst of it's over. But yeah,
Thank
that's what's
God.
new. That's what's new. It's the only time I slow down is when I get sick. So it's kind of this weird mixed blessing because I feel very driven all the time. Like I feel
Yeah.
guilty if I'm not producing something or being industrious or working hard. I got this from my dad. I feel guilty,
Oh
and
yeah.
so it's when I get sick that I sort of give myself permission to slow down, spend a little more time in contemplative reading and prayer. I mean, as a priest, I'm supposed to be doing that, right, all the
Yeah.
time.
Well,
And so
so am I at that rate, but
yeah, everybody is occupational hazard,
Yeah.
but we have to remind ourselves. And so whenever I get sick, I'm kind of grateful to God. It's sort of, I think of the passage in the Psalms where it says, He makes me lie down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and doesn't he do
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. It's
So,
like my parents put that in me too. It's like, if I'm not doing something like moving, it's like, one of the whole reasons I became a chanter in the church was just because like I couldn't sit still. Like I gotta like,
yeah,
be involved and like, every time I get like, the flu or something, I'm finally laying down and, I throw on some like Amazon Prime and I'm like, oh wait, this is what people sit around all day doing sometimes. Wait, this is kind of nice. I
yeah,
could get behind this, yeah. So,
yeah, yeah.
um,
Well, I've been reading a lot, so that's been good.
what have you been reading?
I'm reading, I just finished Beowulf, and
It's a good book.
so yeah, it's great. I haven't read it in years, and so we read that. I'm reading a trilogy on Merlin,
Oh, that's
uh,
pretty cool.
reading Isaiah through Isaiah right now, and several theological books. I'm also doing the last couple years. I've been doing a deep dive into David Jones. I'm actually slightly obsessed with David Jones right
Who's
now.
that? What's the story on that?
He's a British artist, kind of a modernist from he was born in the late 1880s, 1890s, died in 1974, fought in the First World War. He was a
Uh-huh.
visual artist, considered one of maybe the greatest visual artist of the 20th century in Britain. And then he became a poet and wrote, by all accounts, two of the greatest epic poems of the 20th century. and very solid sacramentalist and understanding the world through the Eucharist and sacramental eyes and lens. Very important person that nobody knows about.
Yeah, this is my first time hearing him. I got to
Well,
check out his stuff.
yeah, he's not easy. He's difficult. That's one reason he's not that accessible. So you have to work at him, but it's like mining gold. He's just he's phenomenal, I think. Uh,
Yeah.
so, but it's not something you wade into very lightly. I mean, it takes a commitment to get through his poetry. He wrote arguably the greatest war poem of the 20th century in parentheses, and then his real masterpiece, epic poem, is 240 pages, is Anathemata. And the Anathemata takes place, it's sort of a deconstruction of all of Western history through all the epochs, and he's tying into all the myths of going back into the Ice Age, into the present day.
That sounds
And
so cool. Send
yeah,
that to me
he
if you can,
flows back and
PDF.
forth. It's incredible. Um, but the entire poem takes place in a person's thought process over about 10 seconds.
Whoa.
And the beginning of the poem begins with the elevation of the host in the
Hmm.
Eucharist. And the end of the poem, 245 pages later, ends with the elevation of the chalice.
That's pretty
It's
cool.
it's
That's
a
really cool.
it's a work of genius, honestly. Anyway,
That's
I,
cool. I'm gonna look at what you here. Text me about that after the show because
I'll
I'm like,
text
yeah,
you. Yeah, I'll text
that's
you.
super cool. Yeah, no. What have I do my books a little situationally. Like I kind of make it a rule for me that like I've been doing it honestly. I want to say it's been like a year now. I've been doing it because I go back and forth to Greece a lot. I've been every time I'm on the plane. That's like the only time I actually have time to sit down and read St. John Chrysostom's commentary on Matthew, which is
Uh-huh.
like 2000 and some change pages, and it's like
Yeah,
it's so theologically comprehensive that you could use that alone as a catechism. It's
right,
like
right.
insane.
Yeah,
Like how much
yeah,
stuff is like crammed into there. And then,
yeah.
I got little stuff I'm doing. My one of the guys that works for the podcast, if you're familiar with Saint Sebastian Dabovich, our buddy Gravantis, he put together all of his writings, like his life, and they were like out of circulation for a while, and now he stuffed them all into like a collection and he put it up on Amazon, and people are really getting behind it. So it's
Hmm.
pretty cool. And I've been chipping through that a little bit. And we're gonna read that like
Great.
on the podcast, like a reading
Uh-huh.
series. So
Great, great,
yeah,
wonderful,
that'll be
wonderful.
cool. So anyway, as far as the beginning of your story is concerned, tell me about your young life and what about it made you care about religion and God and the church and such.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate that question. I think it's important. Our history is
Mm.
very important, and we've sort of lost touch with that. You know, the myth of our own myth. You know, our own story, our own narrative, and God's work through that is important to tell. And I appreciate that that's something that you seem to care about and
I love
value.
that context because we're all heroes in a story, but it's our
Yeah,
story and other
yeah,
people's. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so and I'm at an age right now where I'm sort of I'm in the last third, I guess, maybe. I don't know. You know, I'm 58 this year and I can
Oh, you're
see
young. Stop it.
I can see my tombstone off in the distance a little bit. So
I'm 25 and I feel like that sometimes, but anyway,
yeah,
you know.
so I'm sort of reevaluating things. I think you start thinking back a lot more as you get older. You think about your childhood, you think about what formed you and shaped you. And it's amazing how it sticks with you. People think that they can leave all that behind, but you don't leave it behind. And when you become Orthodox, I mean, you apparently I assume you grew up Orthodox or were baptized
I've been doing
as a
this for
child.
25 years. Yeah, it's been a
So,
long run.
but for those of us who entered the church later in life, we think maybe that, you know, we're going to become Orthodox, and I don't know what we think that means, but we're going to somehow shed like our former
The
self
old man per se, yeah.
and that sort of thing, and it just doesn't work that way. And that's part of the psychosis, or it's a bit of I think I'm jumping ahead here. It's a bit of a pathology.
We should talk about that later though.
Yeah, we
That's a
will
good
talk about that
subject.
later.
Yeah.
Let me stick to your question. So I grew up in Virginia, um, in a large household, lots of kids, lots of people there. My parents were incredibly influential in my life. I have to this day tremendous respect and love for both of my parents. They were both not consequential people. They were like a force of nature. They had big personalities, strong, forceful impact on everybody in their life. I mean, both of them. My father's still alive. He lives next door. He's 92. And he's Italian. His family's from Abruzzo. My grandmother's off the boat. My uncles were off the boat. I knew them very well. My mother's from the South in Arkansas. When she met my dad, it was like two worlds colliding. He, of course, comes from more of a Catholic background. She came from a Baptist, Southern Baptist background. I don't think his Catholic faith was all that strong. And so when they met, he swung her way and became Baptist. So we were raised Southern Baptist. It was in some ways a very typical Baptist upbringing. In other ways, it was very atypical. Um, there were six of us, and besides all the other people that used to live with us in our home constantly, because we kept people in the house a lot. It was typical in the sense that we were very conservative morally, theologically. We were very simple. There wasn't a real deep theology. We were just kind of Billy Graham Baptists, like pietists.
Who I think
Bap
had some good things to say, incidentally enough, because I went
oh,
down to North Carolina and I saw like his big compound or whatever. And, a lot of people have like a knee-jerk reaction to like these big Protestant, I guess, personalities. And I was reading some of his stuff and he wasn't necessarily the worst, I don't think, like in some
no,
ways he
heavens
had
no,
some,
no.
yeah,
Heavens, no. I mean, he was a great man, really. I mean, they didn't have all the truth, and they were lacking things and misunderstood things. But that doesn't mean that. I mean, I don't look back on my upbringing in that way at all. I'm very grateful for it, and I believe I was a Christian. I believe I knew Christ.
of
I
course.
believe that the Holy Spirit was at work in my life, without any question. And I had a wonderful upbringing, and we weren't sort of like a reductionist fundamentalist Baptists. We were just simple. We'd go to church all the time, never miss church.
Right.
I mean, I was more faithful at church than most Orthodox people I know. Okay. Like we never miss church, never, not for anything. And Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, every week, plus a couple other times. And we read our Bible every day, told people about Jesus, a simple kind of faith. Um, and I was raised with that. But at the same time, my dad smoked cigars incessantly, and we made wine, and we defended Mother Teresa in Sunday school. So we were sort of atypical Baptists at the same time, a little more open-minded about sort of I don't know, ecumenism. We didn't think the Catholic Church was the whore of Babylon and all Catholics were going to hell. We didn't believe that, so we were raised, it was a little bit different than sort of this fundamentalist, narrow-minded, but we weren't open to like immorality or some weird doctrines about who Jesus is. Nothing like
Sure.
that. We're very conservative about all that kind of stuff. So that's how I was raised. And I don't know, I had a very sensitive conscience from very young age. I was baptized at the age of 6 or 7 years old, I think. And we were Baptist. It was still sort of believers' baptism. So you waited until the person made a decision.
Like the
Um,
age of consciousness thing they speak
yeah,
of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was 7 when that happened for me. But there was like never a time in my memory that I didn't believe in Christ or God, and that sort of thing. So, but I always had sort of a penchant for spiritual things, I guess, or a sensitive conscience. I wasn't a perfect kid by any stretch, but if I did ever sin or do something wrong, I felt really terrible about it. I wrestled with that a lot as a young man. And in high school, I was the guy standing up in sociology class and preaching to the class, basically, like hardcore. Like, I mean, I was like, I didn't care what anybody thought. I would argue with anybody. Sort of my own person. And one sort of anecdotal story that I think might shed some light on my upbringing. We were in our Baptist church there, and it was a small country church, and the pastor was just very beloved, a very charismatic guy, very loving, great pastor, smart, preached, good, solid, rousing, motivational homilies and sermons, and everybody just loved him. And he felt a call to go to the mission field, and so packed his family up, and they went off to Costa Rica. And the deacons of the church had to, do a search committee to find a new pastor. That's how things worked back then.
Hmm.
So they found a guy and brought him in, and he was from West Virginia. And I have to get that in, being from Virginia. It's a slight little inside joke here,
Great
but he was
place,
from
man. I love it
he
there.
was he was from West Virginia. Well, we're pretty hard on West Virginians, actually. It's the butt end of our jokes, but so he came in, and he was a really good person, and a good man and a good pastor. He didn't quite have the charisma of the former guy. His sermons weren't quite as, lucidating and on point, and he was stumbled a little bit in his presentation, I guess I should say. But he was a good man. So the deacons decided to get rid of him, and because he just wasn't measuring up. He didn't have the same panache as the former guy.
Sure.
So we had a meeting. I don't remember what we used to call it. It was Wednesday night, and the whole church was invited to discuss the situation. And I was probably about 12 years old. Maybe I was a little older. Maybe I was 14, 12 to 14 when this happened. And we were incensed, my family, and we were like, this is immoral. This is sinful. You know, this man, we brought this man and his family down here to be the pastor. He's a good pastor. There was not, and we just got to kick him to the side. So everybody had an opportunity to talk. So I stood up in this meeting with all these people in their 50s and 60s, and and intimidating. And I'm like 14 years old. And I got up and I just like preached at them. Like, I mean, I had tears streaming down my face. I'm standing up, turning around to the whole congregation that was there. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is wrong. This is not Christianity. This is not how we treat people. There is such a thing as loyalty and faithfulness. This man, anyway, that was when I was 12 or 14. Well, that was kind of my life growing up, and
Yeah.
I think I got a lot of that from my mother, especially. She was quite the crusader, and very generous people. And anyway, it was very formative, very formative. So moving on, about the age of 17, 18 years old, I really started to feel like a call somehow. I was, even though I was serious about my faith before that, this is the point I got really serious. I kind of felt, I kind of felt like I was straddling the fence. Like, I loved God, I wanted to serve him, but I also kind of wanted to just live for myself, do what pleased me, satisfy my own desires. And I was like, I wanted both of these things. I had a foot on the boat and a foot on the dock, and it was uncomfortable. And it was really tormenting to me, actually. I remember many nights sort of crying myself to sleep at night, just because of the torment of not feeling like I had completely surrendered my will,
Like what to
basically.
do with yourself as like a young man in the world, like finding your place and such.
Well, it was more an internal decision that I was going to say to God, I'm yours, like all yours. Like, I'm not holding anything in reserve. Like, whatever you call me to, it doesn't matter. I want to be completely, surrender my will.
Hmm.
And I was wrestling with that. It wasn't a specific thing. It was just this internal thing that was life changing. So when I was about 18, I kind of had an experience where I got to the point where I was ready to do that. And I did. And I prayed, and I said, Lord, I'm all yours. I want to completely surrender my will to you. Now, I mean, I've been trying to do that now since then, obviously, very imperfectly. But that was definitely a watershed moment in my life, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and everything began to open up for me at that point. And along that same time, a question popped into my head that does not pop into Baptists' heads. I don't know what they do in the Baptist church. They somehow pump something into the air or water. And when you're raised in a good, solid Baptist upbringing that's sincere, You just don't ask this question. I don't know how they keep you from asking it, but somehow they do. And the question I asked was a historical question. What did the early church look like, and how did they worship right after the time of the apostles?
Mm.
So in the Baptist world, the intimation, it's not said outrightly, it's intimated that the apostles and their immediate successors looked like the Baptist church. They don't actually say it. It's just sort of like you get this strong that it's intimated so strongly that it's just an assumption. So I set up an appointment with my pastor to ask him the question. He was a highly educated guy from Naval Academy in Annapolis, smart guy. Sat down with him. I'm 17, 18 years old. So I said, what do we know about what the early church looked like and how they worshiped right after the time of the apostles? And he looks at me and he kind of smiles. He says, it's an interesting question. He says, we don't know. We have no idea. We don't know the answer to that. We really don't know anything about it. And I'm sitting there looking at him. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, how is that possible? Like, we have all this theology, this Christology, Trinitarian theology that's obviously, not explicit in the scriptures. We have all this stuff that we know how they played hopscotch in ancient Egypt and they never wrote it down. Like, how is this possible that we know nothing? So I walked out of the meeting. I said, okay. And I left and I just couldn't believe it. So that sent me on a quest to find the answer to my question. And obviously it didn't take too much digging. Obviously, the internet wasn't around at this time. This is like 1985, 84, 85. But I soon discovered that the church had always been sacramental, had always been liturgical. I mean, it was a Jewish sect, right? I mean, they're
Sure.
Jews. But to a Baptist, this was complete, like this was a revelation, right? And so it set me on this journey to begin to research apostolic Christianity. And before you know it, I was out doing a lot of evangelism. I always loved evangelism. I was very zealous. I would go out 2, 3 times a week. I'd go to the mall. I'd go chase cars down to tell people about Christ. I mean, literally in DC. So I did so much. I was crazy. I was always looking for action, like,
Yeah. It's healthy.
Oh, it was I was on fire. Like I was a fiery young man. And I have lots and lots of stories of things I got myself mixed up in while I was looking for spiritual action. At any rate, I ended up kind of starting to go to this church. It was an Assemblies of God church, and they were just leaving the assemblies, and they were also asking the same questions about early Christianity, apostolic Christianity. And so I joined with the pastor and we started a church. And this was in 1986 that we started this church. And we basically, the basis of the church was this: we were evangelical, charismatic types who were searching for apostolic Christianity. We had the communion every week. We were sort of reading the church fathers a little bit. We were starting to keep the church year, like the rhythm of the temporal cycle of the church year, and just trying to find our way. We didn't think this existed anywhere in reality. We were just like reinventing it for ourselves. Like
Hmm.
we were just gonna search it out and we were gonna recreate this
And
ancient
that
church.
was a self-admitted kind of element of, I'm gonna get this wrong, of I'm not even gonna attempt to guess which Protestant, I guess, denomination was trying to do that, but there were Protestant denominations that looked at the Catholic Church and said, okay, let's rebuild this from the ground up in the way Christ.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we were just evangelical charismatics. I mean, we didn't it was sincere and we just didn't know what we were doing. So we weren't encumbered by anything, really. So in a way, it was fun. It was fun, and actually, in a way, we weren't encumbered by any baggage of any denominationalism or anything like that. It was so simple. In a way, there was a kind of purity about it. I mean, it was ridiculous too at the same time. But God is an opportunist. I fully believe that. God is an opportunist, and he works with anything and everything to
And he's
get
also
us where
very
we needs to
funny.
be.
So, you
He
know.
is very funny. I have heard him laugh on numerous occasions. So so anyway, so we started this church, and we're kind of doing liturgy light, and we're getting into it, and I don't know anything about Orthodoxy at this point, but about 3 years into the journey, I ended up getting married about that time, and about 3 years into the journey, 1990 or so, my wife and I are in our apartment, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and she's reading a book on the couch there, and I all young men's favorite. I don't know if you're married. All young men's favorite
Not even
pastime.
close. I wish.
Okay, well, is their favorite pastime is to annoy their wife, right? They
Of
just, I don't know
course.
why they enjoy doing that, but so I was wanting to annoy her, so I said, "Why are you reading that trash novel? Why don't you read something like something good?" And my wife only reads classics. She was probably reading Dickens or something. So, she said, "Leave me alone." I said, "No, you need to read something worth reading." And she said, "Like what?" And I just grabbed a book off the shelf, and I opened it up and I started reading it. And when she saw I wasn't going to stop, she said, "I'm going to bed." So she went to bed. Well, I couldn't stop reading it. I sat down, I backed up and sat in my chair, and I read till 4 in the morning. I read through the night. I finished the book cover to cover.
What was it?
It was Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky.
Isn't it great?
So now we had sort of been playing around and pursuing this sort of liturgical, sacramental, ancient Christianity, but we hadn't really learned that much about it. It was just we were dabbing our toe in the water. And then I don't know anything about Orthodoxy to speak of. And I read this book and it just blew me away. And I said, wait a minute, this is what I'm looking for. Like this is like this the description of what's going on here, the metaphysics, the ideas, the concepts, the everything just resonated. So I ran next door in the morning, spoke to my mother, who is a great literary person. She read more than anybody I've ever known. And I said, what should I read next? And she said, The Brothers Karamazov. It's the greatest novel ever written. So I ran to Borders. This is back when we still had bookstores. I bought The Brothers Karamazov that day. And now that took me 2 or 3 weeks to get through. And I read through it. By the time I finished, I was like, this is it. This is what? This is the truth. This is the faith. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. And I operate off of a lot of intuition, kind of an artistic background, my personality. Not kind of, I mean, very strongly, actually. And so that set me on this Orthodox journey. And so we continued in that church for 10 years, so 1986 to 1996.
Real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but two real quick questions just while we're within the context of it. First of all, I've heard so many people talk about how Theodore Dostoevsky have set them on the path to orthodoxy. Why do you think he does that to people? What is it about his literature?
Um, he gets to the metaphysical bullseye of the truth.
Right.
So I think one of the great gifts, I think one of the reasons that Orthodoxy is being so successful right now in our culture and bringing people in and appealing to people. I think the reason why a lot of young people are flocking into the church is because we are describing the faith, the truth of reality, through a metaphysical lens.
Yeah.
And I think that this resonates with people. It helps answer the big questions like what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to exist? What is the meaning of life? What is it sort of gives us a cosmological, a logos cosmology,
Yeah.
the imprint of God on nature and that sort of thing. It answers the problems of evil, the existence of evil, in as much as that can be answered. In all of the conundrums, the antinomies of God's sovereignty, man's free will, these problems that arose in Protestantism, um, it 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 put Christianity has come to be seen through sort of moralism, rationalism. It's sort of a reductionist sort of approach, religiosity, so much in the world. And Orthodoxy pushes all of that aside and really gets to the heart of sort of a ontological, metaphysical way of seeing and knowing the truth. The truth is a person, and it's an encounter with God and respects sort of the antinomy of everything, the seeming paradox.
Yeah, and
So,
you know what's so cool about it though? It's like so my spiritual father, he has me reading the Areopagite, Saint Dionysius and Maximus the Confessor, and like the way that they describe the system of it. It's like, you know what, like when you're in college and you don't get something and then the whole thing like at some point just kind of locks into like this nice
yeah,
neat little bow and you
yeah,
kind of understand. It's like, oh my goodness.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
and when that clicks for people, I think that's what gets them here.
Yeah, when things fall into place. And yeah, so I think Orthodoxy generally does a better job at that than anybody else. I think the Roman Catholic Church on paper um, has the potential to speak this way, but they have not done a good job of it. I think they've actually done probably a pretty miserable job of it for various reasons, but I don't want to get into all that right now.
Sure.
But I do think that there's you asked the question what spoke to me through Dostoevsky, and I think that it was fresh and it swept away the debris and the fog and the opaqueness, and it brought some piercing clarity about the really big questions about the meaning of everything
Hmm.
and and sort of against the moralism and rationalism that we sort of view Christianity through. So I think that's the answer, and I think that's for me this is very, very important. We'll talk about this I'm sure later, but in terms
And
of catechesis and raising our children, keeping our children in the faith, I think this is absolutely critically important that we understand that this is an important factor in how we can keep our kids in the faith.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is something that we need to understand as well, you know, and be able to teach our kids this stuff, like we need to get it so that they get it. Like that's the
Yes.
whole
Yes.
ethos
Yeah.
of it. And then
Exactly.
and the other thing I wanted to ask you, if you're okay talking about it, because you know I love stories. Would you be okay telling us about how you met your wife and how
Oh,
that all happened?
this is a great story. Okay, so I asked you if you were married. You said not hardly. So this is going to sound weird, maybe to some people. When God does something in your life, very particular in your life, something very particular, like He really moves in your life in a certain way. Very often later on, as you move through life, you sort of have maybe a gift, or it becomes something that God uses you in other people's lives.
Yeah.
Right? That makes sense.
Hmm.
Okay, that's not too weird. Well, I've always felt that way about helping young people sort of find their spouse.
Feel free to chip in.
So I'm just giving this to you. This is all free, no charge whatsoever. But
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
this is one of the things that I have sort of had a real keen interest in, and it's particularly because of the story I'm about to tell you, because it's a great story. So as a young man, I like to date girls. I'm Italian, right?
You're right
So
across the river from me. We have the same
yeah,
instinct.
we're
Yeah,
like we're like cousins. So
of course.
yeah, so I enjoyed dating girls. I wanted to get married. I mean, I thought I wanted to be a monk for a while, and I'm like, no, 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 that's not for me. So, but at the same time that I was getting really serious about my faith, I decided that I was going to stop dating and that I was going to basically marry myself to the church and Christ, and I was just going to work my tail off and be in church every day and just really devote myself to God, and that He would take care of finding me. There was no sense in getting all romantically involved with girl after girl. Just what's the point? I need to meet the right person when the time is right, and do the proper procedure, and then we get married. So I said I'm going to stop dating. So I was praying this. I had a prayer rule at the time. I wasn't Orthodox, obviously, long before I was Orthodox. I had a prayer rule. I prayed an hour every day, and in that prayer, I sort of prayed through the Lord's Prayer. And going through the Lord's Prayer, I would pray about various things. And at one point, I would pray for my wife, my future wife, every single day. Every day I'd pray, for 5 or 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, for this, Lord, please, whoever she is, keep her safe, bring us together. So after 3 months, now I'm gonna sound a little charismatic here, so I hope that doesn't scandalize or offend anybody, but
That's all right. That's all
it
right. I
is what
went
it
to
is.
Geneva for a little bit while I was in college, so I love
Yeah.
those kind of people.
So I'm just telling you my story and whether it was whatever. So I'm praying every day. So for 3 months I prayed. So after 3 months, I get one morning I wake up and I'm going through my prayer and I get to the point where I'm going to pray for my wife, my future wife. And I felt like the Lord spoke to me. And not out loud, but in my mind, I could hear, his voice. And I felt like the Lord said, you don't need to pray for a wife anymore. It's all taken care of. So that's
Hmm.
what I heard. Said you don't pray for this anymore. It's done. It's been taken care of. So I never prayed again for a wife after that. And I was very excited to hear this. I was like, this is great. This is fantastic. So um so I'm working at church. I'm working with the young adults, the college and career age. And there's lots of young gals coming in and they're pious girls, pretty girls, nice, good, options for me. And I'd say, oh, maybe that's her. And I'm like, no, maybe that's her. No, that's not her. And during this time, there were 3 or 4 of these young girls with their mothers, by the way, who came and said, God told us that you're supposed to marry my daughter.
Oh, this is sounding
And
very Greek already.
oh, yes. So I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that, God told me, I felt like God said I'll know when it's right. So that's the backstory. So I'm working at church. I'm not dating. This is going on for about 3 years. And my sister, who's still at the Baptist church, I'm at that new church we helped start. That's kind of the, searching for apostolic Christianity church. So my sister comes to me. She says, "Hey, I met the girl you're going to marry." And
Hmm.
she knew I wasn't dating and everything. And I'm like, "What?" She says, "Yeah, I met the girl you're going to marry. I'm sure of it. I know it. I'm absolutely certain." And I'm like, "You're crazy." So so she didn't say anything else. A month or two go by. And I said, "Hey, whatever happened to that girl you told me about?" She says, "Oh," she gets a little sheepish, looks at the ground. She's like, "Well, I found out she's married." And and then my sister says, "But I'm not giving up. I know, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was right about this. I don't know, I don't understand, but I'm not giving up." And I'm
I
like,
can't wait
"You're."
till this goes live and I can show it to my sister. I'm like, where is this motivation coming from you, huh?
I said, "You're nuts. Like you're crazy. Like
Yeah.
just stay out of it." So a few months go by. She comes to me and she says, "You remember that girl I told you about?" I'm like, "Yeah, did her husband like die or something?" And she says, "No, but I found out she has a sister." And I'm like, "Okay." She says, "Yes, she's from Texas. She lives in Texas." And she says, "But she's coming home to visit the parents." So that her sister and the parents were all going to the Baptist church with my sister. I didn't know these people. "She's coming home for a visit, and I've arranged a party at my house for the two of you to meet." And I'm like, "You never even met the girl." She says, "No." I said, "What does she look like?" She says, "I don't know, but her parents are really good looking, so I'm sure she's fine." Right. So I'm like, "All right, fine. I'll come meet her." So we go to her house. I'm standing inside. She's walking up. She gets out of the car with her sister and her parents, and they're coming up the sidewalk. And I'm like, "Man, she's pretty." So she walks in and she sees my brother-in-law through the window, and she's like, oh, I hope that's not him. And then I had a picture. I was a Shakespearean actor, and I had a headshot hanging on the wall.
Were you
Um,
actually, you were like a thespian? Like this was your
yeah,
thing? No
yeah, yeah,
kidding.
yeah. That's yeah. I almost went to Juilliard actually,
That's pretty
so
cool.
that figures into the story. She walks in, she sees my picture, and she's like, "Oh, he's cute." Anyway, so we met there in the foyer, and everybody went in the living room. We went into the kitchen together, and we spent 4 hours in the kitchen talking, and we knew we were going to get married.
That's so cool.
And she we knew, and I tell the story later. I think when I'm talking to people about how to find a good spouse, I think we have very different personalities, like polar opposites, but we have the same values. And that's what's important. When you're looking for a spouse, your personality type doesn't really that matter that much. I mean, you know, opposites attract. You get along with somebody with different personality.
And
But you
sometimes
really,
the difference is kind of fresh to the other person, which is like
yeah,
kind of how it
yeah.
helps. Yeah.
I mean, it works both ways. There's good and bad to it. It's not like you don't have to overcome some stuff. You do, but
You don't want a carbon copy of yourself walking around
yeah.
because it's like if I had to deal with me walking around like next to you, I, uh,
But you want the same values, because if your values are not generally close to the same priority of values, you're going to have a lot of conflict. So that's what's important. And we had the same values. And I think we sized each other up within the first hour of conversation. And I figured out this woman that I'm talking to, Christ was absolutely number one in her life. And she would drop me like a hot potato if it meant following Christ, right? And that
yeah.
was the kind of person I wanted to marry. And I was the same way. And I that was what she valued more than anything. And so I think that's what attracted us to one another. So we spent the next 4 days together, every waking moment, going on dates and out and everything. And we were talking, we were like, oh my gosh, this is insane. This is crazy. And what's happening here? And this is really, we were just, our heads were spinning. And then she took me to the airport and I flew to Europe for 3 months. I was a blacksmith. I'm an architectural blacksmith by trade. And
Can I
so,
commission you for a cool knife because I'm in need of a new one?
yeah, sure, I can make you a knife. I can make
Yeah.
you a Damascus pattern welded steel knife.
I got a cool Damascus. I ruined it. Right now I'm just working with like this spider
Oh,
that
oh
I picked
boy.
up and it's like, and it's fine, but it's like, I want something maybe a little
Yeah,
more artisan per se.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do all that. I've been doing that for decades. So anyway, I go to Europe and she goes back to Texas and I'm in Venice, right? The most romantic city in the world. And I mean, the gondoliers are singing in the moonlight at midnight, and I'm out there, you know, crying in my beer because I miss this girl that I had just met. Um, anyway, I had a great trip. I worked all over Europe as blacksmith and I had all kinds of
Did you ever make
amazing
it to Greece?
experiences. What's that?
Did you ever make it to Greece?
No, well, my son and I went later. I didn't go on this trip, but
Okay.
but he and I went to Rhodes a couple of years ago and stayed in a monastery there,
It's
which
nice
was
over there,
great.
huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. Um, so I talked to her on the phone like 4 times a week, and this is back in like the 80s. So things are different, right? I mean, it's very expensive. You know, there's no cell phones. It's very challenging. And but we were just in love. We started talking about marriage. A lot went on. Anyway, long story short, I get home 3 months later. I go see her parents. I said, I want to go ask Carrie to marry me. I want to go propose. Do I have your permission? They're like, yeah, we knew when we met you, back when, that you were the right one.
How cool.
So I fly down to Lubbock, Texas, and I had no money. When I got home, my parents were missionaries. They were in Alaska when she was there and we first met. So they had since gotten home. My dad says, we got to go pay the phone bill. So we drive up, and the phone bill was $3,500. So no kidding, $3,500. This is in 1980s. So that was every penny I had in the bank, almost every penny. Like that wiped me out. And so when I went to propose to her, the ring that I gave her, the engagement ring, I showed up at her apartment like at midnight. Went home, got a suit on, and she found somebody, a church friend,
You should have just had the box with the phone bill on the inside.
that's what I had. No, no, no. I made a ring out of the phone bill. So she still has it. She still has it. So I made a ring out of the phone bill, and that's her engagement ring.
No
And
kidding.
we'd only seen each other 4 days at this point, right? So she says yes, and thank God. And anyway, she had to finish teaching. She was a music teacher in Lubbock. She had to finish out the year. So we traveled back and forth 3 or 4 times. She came back to Virginia, and we got married like a month later. Oh, there's one more aspect of this story which is fantastic. She was dating this Yahoo,
This
bozo guy.
Yahoo.
Yeah, she was dating this guy, pretty serious, for 2 years or longer, long distance, and
Yeah.
he couldn't make up his mind. So he was like, not really that serious. And 2 weeks before she met me, she called him up and she says, "Look, you got you got a month to make up a decision where this is going. Otherwise, I'm done with you. So this was 2 weeks before we met. So then she comes to Virginia. We meet. I go to Europe. She goes back home. When she gets back home after we met for those first 4 days,
Yeah.
he shows up on her front door from out of state, unannounced, with an engagement ring and says, okay, you gave me the ultimatum. I made up my mind. I want to ask you to marry me. She'd been dating the guy 2 years. She just met me for 4 days. She says, sorry, buddy, you're too late. I already met the guy I'm going to marry.
Isn't life like a movie sometimes? It just never. Look, listen to me. I have been saying this to like my sister for the past like 4 months, and it has not failed like over the course of the past like 2 years. I've been telling her every single day is funnier than the last without exception. And it just doesn't fail. It
Yeah.
really doesn't. But man, you gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, I mean, and we've been married 35 years this year. Yeah, 35 years this year.
God
And
bless you. How
I
cool.
tell you what, we have a beautiful marriage. I feel like we're still on our honeymoon. I mean, we've had such a blessed marriage, and I thank God every single day. And she really, my wife is a saintly woman, and I refer to her as nearly perfect in every way. And she makes my life as a priest very much more palatable. I think I know a lot of priests, and they might have wonderful wives. Like if the wife is such a integral part of that life, and it can make things very easy or very difficult for a priest,
Oh my God, yeah. No,
and
I was
it can
talking to
make a
my
big difference.
I was talking to my spiritual father because, like, just I like asking like big, general, abstract questions because, usually you'll find an answer in there that you didn't even think about the question to ask to get it in. I was like, how do you avoid? Because, I mean, you're a priest. Like, I'm not going to say it on here, but, like, you've heard stories of, like, how that whole dynamic crumbles for somebody that enters the
Yeah.
priesthood. And I asked him, how as a seminarian, how do I survive in the priesthood? What, God willingly, if I eventually get there, he said, a wife can make or break you. And then
Yeah.
his wife calls over from the kitchen because she's a Southern woman. She goes, "He's right."
Yeah,
I was like, yeah,
it's true. It's true. And I tell you what, the Lord really was gracious to me, and I love my wife. She's an amazing person and a godly person, but she's a great priest wife.
yeah.
And so she makes life very easy for me. And that's a great support. So yeah, so that's my fairy tale. That's the Reader Digest version of it, but that's my fairy tale story of how I met my wife and our life together. We have 6 kids, 5 girls and a boy. The 5 girls are all married. I had 4 grandchildren this year,
That's so cool.
in
You
addition to the other 3 that I already have.
you got a little
So
tribe getting built up there, don't you?
oh yeah, yeah. We've got a unique situation here. I live on 100 acres. My
100 acres. God
yeah,
bless you.
my 2 sisters, my dad, my mother-in-law lives over here. My niece lives over here. My dad has like 30 grandchildren, close to 20 great-grandchildren. They're all in the faith. They're all, together. And so we have a big extended family, and this is really an important part of life for us and our church. It's impacted our church tremendously because I was raised with this strong sense of community and family and loyalty. And this is the kind of culture that, that we have in our community, in our church, our parish life. And it's our chief number one value is maintaining that peace and the harmony in the community and this sense of loyalty and faithfulness to one another. And
Hey, look, if that's not the American dream, I don't know what is. I mean, that's
yeah, well,
that's the ideal.
we have people that come and see what we have here all the time, and they're just blown away, and they're like, "Wow, I wish I could have that." And I chuckle. I'm like, "Well, you can, but it doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
It requires a tremendous amount of sacrifice, and you have to be really intentional about it. It's not just going to like happen by accident. Like you have to make lots of decisions, tough decisions to maintain it. And we were indoctrinated by my father growing up. I mean, this is all pre-Orthodoxy. I mean, I came to Orthodoxy. Probably one of the big draws for me theologically was John 17, was the Trinitarian dogma and the periokesis, the interpenetration of love among the three persons and being as communion, and this whole sort of ontological realization that that existence and to be is communion, the love of the Holy Trinity. This was the most profound sort of draw as I began to open up to me the Orthodox teaching of our dogma. And then when I came into the church, to be quite frank, I was often scandalized that, people didn't really, a lot of times, this didn't translate into the local community life in many instances.
Right.
And so anyway, this is really a passion for me that our local communities, our local parishes and parish communities need to exemplify this kind of sense of commitment to one another and faithfulness and loyalty and working through conflict and stability, of maintaining stability of place, stability of relationships. And anyway, I think this is a value that is absolutely fundamental. And it's a big reason why I became Orthodox or was
I
drawn to Orthodoxy.
I agree, and you see a lot of that, back in the old country from my experience. But it's something that like because back there, like it kind of just like falls into your lap, like it comes with the culture, like people being together in that way. But
Yeah,
here, you know, Americans. I love America and I love Americans. I need to preface that as a Greek every time
yeah,
I say something.
right,
It's there's like an epidemic of like isolation
yeah,
and like directionlessness with a lot of young people here, and
right,
they don't know how to intentionally form that, but it has to be intentional here, kind of like
right.
what you were saying.
Right. Yeah. So that's really the heartbeat of our community. It's really at the core of everything that I teach and preach about, all of our decisions, like what ministries we're going to get involved in and the activities, programs we're going to have, and things, emphases that we're going to have in our community and church. It is all guided and directed by this fundamental value of the community. So we measure every decision against that. How is having a ladies' Bible study or book club or working at the soup kitchen, how is that going to impact this core value that we have and support it? And this is not an easy thing to control all the time, but I have a guiding principle that we follow, and that's something I believe very, very strongly, that to hold a community together with this kind of culture. Well, first of all, we're talking about establishing a culture, and we live in an anti-culture. Like
That's a good word for it. Thank you
you
for
know,
because I never because look, so everybody that works for the podcast, the Orthochat, everybody that helps out, not well, 90% of them are American converts, minus some Greeks and a Serb. Um, and when I look at America and I look at people that did not grow up like I did, because I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. I grew up around,
mm,
40 Greeks my age, all my best friends, all my, co-communicants in the faith. We hung out together all the time. Like our families were cousins and knew each other and so on and so forth. Like, this was something that we were just kind of given, and the culture was given to us as well. And it was ingrained in us for us to give to our kids. But, when you look at Americans now, it's like I hate to say it because I think Americans are a people with heritage and culture, and they deserve that.
yeah,
Like every people deserves it. People in that use of the terminology, but I don't think people know what it is, and I
yeah,
think it might have been lost somewhere, and it's
yeah,
damaging people.
yeah. Well, I mean, we I mean, yes, all of that is true. And in addition to that, since modernism and the Enlightenment, um, Christopher Dawson, really important person, maybe one of the most important maybe one of the most important historians of the 20th century, if not the most important, really taught and established this idea that religion is the basis of culture, and is a profoundly important principle. And he's spot on. Religion is the basis of culture. The cult is what establishes the culture. And with the Enlightenment, which was basically set up by the Protestant Reformation as a precursor to the Enlightenment, God is dead. So rationalism, humanism, secularism, scientism, progressivism, utilitarianism. Then you're moving on to the Industrial Revolution and to economic, and then fascism and communism. All these
You know
isms.
what's really funny? If we were just talking about Dostoevsky and now we're talking about like the prevalence of religion being the basis of culture, and I feel like we're having the Jordan Peterson podcast right now.
Well, yeah, except Jordan Peterson, as great as he might be and helpful in the way God's using him, he's still really searching for the full answers to these things.
May God lead him there eventually,
Yeah,
but
may
it's
God lead him.
but my
So
my point in saying that though is like, this idea that religion is the basis of culture. I mean, the reason I thought about that was because you look at like the communist revolutions in priorly, some of the most religious countries that ever existed. You look at the Cultural Revolution in China, wipes away religion and culture follows that overnight being desecrated. Same thing with
yeah,
communist Russia. It's like and like the Eastern Bloc countries kind of followed suit, maybe unintentionally, but when religion dies in a nation, I think a people's sense of self dies with it.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this really goes back to the Enlightenment and modernism because, sort of humanistic rationalism replaces God. And, this hocus pocus and magic and fairy tales and fantasy and everything. And we're enlightened now. And so culture has to have something to rally around. There has to be a nucleus or something. And it became, essentially God's removed from that as the center of culture. And so it gets replaced with ideologies. So ideologies become, the God, the new God, the new
Or the head of
religion.
state in some cases, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, all the various ideologies become the new religion. And obviously they can't sustain a culture because it's not the true God. And so that's the world we live in. We live in a world that this is our inheritance, and you can trace it right on back, and you can see the progression of it, and that's the day we're in. I mean, I think if I'm correct about this, I think the term atheism actually was sort of coined in the 18th century. Before that, there really wasn't much of a sense of any kind of, I mean, nobody was really atheistic. I mean, there was no such thing. I mean, there might be some really
Like
obscure
questionable, but nobody was like
anomaly.
affirmative, like, there
Yeah,
is no God. Like it's
yeah.
just
So atheism takes off at this time and everything. So I don't know how did we get into all this, but we were talking about stability and community and something. There was something that set us off down this rabbit
I
trail.
think we get
Yeah.
along because we like tangents. It's like our
Oh,
favorite.
culture. I know what it was. It was
Yeah.
culture. Yeah, we were saying we're kind of in an anti-culture. So for us, what we're doing at St. Patrick's is um, we're recognizing the fact that we sort of live in this fractured anti-culture. And if we're going to establish some kind of a stable community with stability and with faithfulness, and that a part of this has to be cultural. I mean, this is part of rebuilding culture. And but you don't go about just like trying to fabricate a culture. That's not how it works. That it has to be more organic and sort of there has to be something authentic and organic about how it takes place. You don't just go out and say, I'm going to just build a culture. That's kind of like what we were doing back in the 80s we were going to reinvent the apostolic church. It doesn't work like that. Um,
Well, Americans have been trying to do that through music and art for like the past like 50 years, and it just
yeah,
hasn't, and it doesn't stick because now we're seeing every trend lasts about as quick as you could blink. Like
yeah,
nothing sticks
yeah,
with people and speaks
right.
to their soul.
Exactly. It has no staying power. It doesn't have stability, and lack of stability, instability is probably one of the primary symptoms of the pathology of our world. and lack of culture is instability, and I would say insecurity too, by the way, which I think is sort
Oh,
of at
big
the root
time.
of all of our sin is insecurity. But I don't want to chase that rabbit right now. So
We'll
let
do that. We'll
me
do that after. Yeah.
so let me finish this thought here if I can wrap this up. So basically, as I began to think about how do we establish and build this kind of community, and you've got a lot of people talking about this stuff. You know, Rod Dreher wrote his book about the Benedictine option. Wendell Berry, I don't know if you're familiar with Wendell Berry, another really important guy in the 20th century.
I know Dreyer, not Wendell.
Wendell Berry is he's a Christian of the Baptist ilk, but very important philosopher, poet, and novelist who his whole life has been devoted to sort of sounding the alarm about these issues and talking about stability of place and stability of community and stability of relationships. And he, as a philosopher, he understands that there has to be something to hold this together, to create this stability. Like it can't just be an abstract concept or an idea. It's got to be something tangible, something concrete, something real. So I applaud him for that. The problem is, as a Baptist, he can't know what that something is. It's not available to him in his worldview, Christian worldview. And so the best he could come up with is the land.
Hmm.
So he's a farmer philosopher. He literally has a farm. And actually, if you haven't read his books, you should read Wendell Berry. He's fantastic. Read like Hannah Coulter if you like novels, great book, and
Okay.
Jayber Crow, fantastic stuff. Anyway, so the land is important, right? But the land cannot perform the function. It can't be the instrument to create the kind of stability that he envisions and believes in. And he must know this. He's like 80 years old. I'd love to go visit him before he dies, but he must know this. But he can't put his finger on what it is. Dreher, for that matter, also can't put his finger on what it is. I'm not trying to be critical of anybody here. I'm just
Oh, don't
saying.
worry. I bother Rod Dreyer on Twitter more than enough, so I'll pick up the
So
slack for you.
so Rod, he's writing for a broad audience, right? He's writing for Presbyterians and Episcopalians and charismatics and whatever, and Orthodox. And Rod's an Orthodox Christian, and he's speaking to all these problems that we have, and he's talking about community and intentional community and all this stuff. But he can't really come out and say this is the nucleus, the magnetic center that will hold this all together, that will make this an actual reality, because it would exclude the vast majority of his audience.
Meaning the land.
No. That's William Barry's is the land. And William Barry, it can't be, I'm saying it can't be the land. And Rod Dreher can't say what it is either.
Oh,
Because I haven't,
he doesn't even present
yeah,
optionality.
he
Okay.
doesn't really present an actual solid core. Because I'm getting ready to tell you what I think it is.
Okay.
Um, and it's not an abstraction, it's not an idea, it's not a concept, it's an actual real thing. Okay.
I'm ready.
And I'm convinced that this is what it is. And when I say it, you're going to have to agree with me because it's impossible to disagree.
Okay.
It's the sacrifice of the mass.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, forget but yeah, it's that. Yeah.
So it can't be anything else.
I think you could honestly, if you want to simplistically term what is our point in life, it's take communion. That's it.
So
That's the point of this.
the mass or the liturgy, divine liturgy, we use the term mass, the same thing. So
Yeah.
the sacrifice of the mass, the sacrifice of Christ is experienced and made present in the divine liturgy and in the mass is what constitutes the church. It's what constitutes the community. The church is the community, and it's not a Bible study. It's not a ministry to the poor. It's not an unwed mother's home. It's not whatever. It's the sacrifice of the mass, and more in a very concrete way. It's not the idea of it. It's the actual event of it that is on your calendar. So you go to your local parish And whether you have a wall calendar they provide for you and you can read it, or whether you get an email, or whether you go onto Google Calendar, whatever, on the web page, and you say, oh, we have divine liturgy, coming up for the Annunciation or whatever. I'm not going, I'm going to have to record my favorite, TV show that night because I'm going to liturgy.
Right.
So, I'm not going to plan my vacation during Holy Week, right? You organize your life, your whole life, and the life of your family is organized and formed and shaped around the liturgical calendar
And around the Eucharist.
and around the Eucharist in particular. And the Eucharistic liturgical, celebration is basically immutable. It's relatively immutable. It's not something, we don't change it. We don't play around with it. The calendar is, it's all fixed. It's received from above. We might decide to have, let's say at my church, let's say we're going to do a soup kitchen this year. We might do that 3-4 years, and we might decide, this has kind of run its course. Let's put our energies into an unwed mother's home. We can change the things. They're both good things.
Sure.
The sacrifice is not like that. It is the thing that not only creates, but holds the community together.
Now, here's the thing. I could not agree with you more. So it's the Eucharist, and then the only people in history that transcend that principle are the clerical orders of the church, that their only additional, I guess, element to that is assisting people to get to the Eucharist. But I don't think that what I think is lost upon people, I don't think it's immediately obvious to the uninitiated how the Eucharist unites community and establishes a people.
Right. So let's get practical. So we have 3 services a day at St. Patrick's.
Good for you. Wow.
So very robust liturgical schedule. And about 2/3 of the year we have daily mass. And then every day we have lauds and vespers. So orthros and vespers every single day. And mass we have at daily about 2/3 of the year. And then on the third of the year that it's not daily, we usually have 2 to 3 extra masses during the week.
I like your guys' words for stuff. I gotta come visit Western Rite Parish.
You're welcome to come anytime. You're not that far, so come down and visit us. So we have a robust liturgical schedule, and what we've done is I make sure we have a certain amount of resources, basically meaning time and energy. So I make sure that we don't load up our schedule and our church calendar and schedule with too many extra things that are going to take people's time and energy so that they can't come to the liturgical services. The liturgical services are the absolute core of our community. So that's number one. I have to guard the schedule. And we do have a lot of stuff going on, but we have to be careful. I teach and preach about it a lot. And our people we'll have mass on a Monday night, at 6 or 7 p.m. and I'll have 40, 50, 60 people there. Which is pretty phenomenal. It's not always like that. I mean, but it's not unusual.
It's sizable, yeah. It's good.
At the same time. So we're trying to build this culture where that is the center of their life. So they come to church, and then after mass, everybody goes out in the parish hall and hangs out. So there's the post-liturgical loitering. So this is key. So basically, we people talk. We have a little coffee. Sometimes people spend hours out there talking. They're meeting up. That's where community is happening, right? This is where community is taking place. And by making the Mass and the sacrifice of the Mass the absolute center of our lives, and forming our weekly schedule, our monthly schedule, yearly schedule, that's what creates that community. It's not a cycle. It does work on us psychologically, emotionally, but it's in the Spirit too. The chief way that it works is in the Holy Spirit. When we gather together and pray together and receive Christ together, what's reinforced is our commitment to one another. And this was what I was going to say earlier. One of the things I was scandalized by when I did end up finally becoming Orthodox was I met a lot of Orthodox people that sort of treated the local, like the Eucharist, the sacrament, like a franchise, like a Starbucks franchise, or McDonald's. I've been to McDonald's in Russia. You get the same hamburger there that you get in Bealton. And
In
it's kind
Greece,
of
they
like
got gyros at McDonald's.
really. So you can go to any Orthodox church and receive the sacrament, and it's all about, what you're getting. It's like you're getting this medicine of immortality in the sacrament for your own spiritual health, and that's what matters. It's kind of very individualistic thing.
Yeah.
And and so people are bopping around from church to church to church. They're going from this church to that church, and then I don't get into that. I think that's a real problem. That's very Protestant. That's just not exemplify my vision for how we're supposed to be living out our faith.
Now,
So yeah,
do you think this might be a result of the very utilitarian ethos that Americans have kind of adopted within themselves, just like on a general plane, and it's like kind of like you see what I'm saying? Like has it
yeah,
applied to this as well?
yeah. I mean, it's a combination of sort of a Protestant individualism that people bring into their Orthodox experience. Um, but honestly, but I think that's a big part of it. But I'm going to be a little controversial here for a minute. I don't spend too much time criticizing Catholics or people who aren't Orthodox because that's not my business. I mean, I do criticize them a little bit. I spend most of my time critiquing my own church because I think that that's the right thing to do,
That's
not to
where the
be
work is to be done.
critiquing
Yeah.
other people. So I love my church and I want everybody to be Orthodox. I have a heart for evangelism, but judgment begins in the household of God. And I think that for us to be truly humble, we have to look honestly at ourselves, and how we can grow and repent and things. So the Orthodox Church is certainly the fullness of the faith, and it's the church and the pure church and all of that. I believe that. But we also have problems, and I think we have to look at them honestly. And so I think to answer your question, looking at home first, I think when we look through the history of Orthodox, there's been such one of the things that we do really, really well is focusing on um, asceticism, the pursuit of holiness, our whole
Repentance on a larger scope, I
yeah,
guess.
our whole theology of theosis and sort of, and then you bring in with that sort of the whole Hesychast tradition, and now we live in a sort of neo-Palamite world, which a lot of Orthodox don't realize this is kind of a new thing. Okay, this didn't exist not that long ago. So we live in this new neo-Palamite world, and the Hermetic, the cave dwellers and the pole sitters and the
The
strong and
Stylite saints and
yeah, the
such.
strong emphasis on this sort of the individual Christian with their prayer group,
Which certainly
and
has its place, to be
no, I'm
sure.
not, I'm not absolutely like I started off by saying this is what we do really well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is our glory in a sense. Like there's nobody that does this better than us. This is what all the other traditions look at Orthodoxy and they're like starry-eyed because they see this beautiful thing that we have maintained. But there's a flip side, and I think and I wonder if it hasn't produced a little bit of a sort of an isolated individualism. And I know in certain jurisdictional traditions, even for example, the parishioner is encouraged. Congregational singing or congregational participation in the liturgy is actually discouraged as being unspiritual. And I don't want to go naming names, but
So I agree with you. And maybe I've been thinking about this abstractly for a while. So I'll tell you just a little bit about how I grew up. I grew up around the monasteries. I knew Elder Ephraim since I was 4, and I went to go visit him every chance I got to before he passed away. Um, I was always near monasteries, and that's where, either in Greece or here, and that's essentially where half of my liturgical life took place, if not substantially more than half. And what I noticed going through that is people think, I'm going to say this very, not crudely, but I guess like rudimentary. Um, People think that being the individualistic hezekiah ascetic monk by yourself, struggling in the spiritual life by yourself, or doing that is inherently more beneficial across the board spiritually than being appropriately an active member of a parish with a community, which I don't think is necessarily correct, and it's not for everybody. But
Yeah.
people don't like hearing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what you're kind of getting at
Yeah,
here?
yeah, yeah. I think the Orthodox Church has done a great job at promoting and accentuating the beauties of this aspect of our spiritual lives, but maybe in a way to the expense of the truly valuing community life and in that sense. And that's why you can have people who bop into a church with their prayer rope and stand in the corner and stare at the ground and say their private prayers while the liturgy's going on. And then it's no big deal for them to just go to a different church each week or, bop
And
around from
straight
here to
home,
there.
go straight home after and not meet
And
anybody.
my point is that we're receiving Christ in the midst of a community. We're receiving Christ with our brothers and sisters. And yes, I mean, Christ is being consumed and received by my brother Christians in Austin, Texas, but that's not who I'm receiving Christ with, I mean, I can go to that church and fellowship with them and receive Christ with them, but I have this community, this family that God has put me with, and I'm working out my salvation with these people, and I need to be committed to them. If they irritate me, if I have conflict with them, if I'm bored with them, this is where I learn how to love. This is where I learn how to forgive and seek forgiveness, is in the midst of this particular group of people.
And you know
Our
what's
or
really funny? It's synonymous to the spirit of the age in that way.
Yeah,
Like, oh, when we talk, I'm not gonna use explicit nomenclature here, but when we think about the carnality of the youth now, and we think about how young people, I mean, pretty much everybody of all ages now translates love. It's you do things with, a person you're interested in, you kind of hang out for like 3 weeks, and as soon as the first conflict arises, everything falls apart and you just repeat the cycle with somebody
yeah,
else. That is synonymous to being in a parish, kind of hanging out with people. Oh, this it's fresh, it's new, everybody likes each other, and as soon as the first stick in the gears pops up, it's like, oh, well, can't stand this place, going to the church across the street. And it's like, that's not, first of all, there's no crown in heaven in being that impatient with people.
yeah,
And
yeah,
second of all, especially what you're talking about right now is an answer that I've been looking for to a question I've had for like the past 2 months.
yeah,
I spit when I'm talking because ugh. But it's like, when like like I was kind of hinting at before, we live in a time where people who may not have the best parents, who may everybody's defined by this sense of social anxiety. I'm sure you've heard this word before. And now we're in this position where, okay, they're not getting a sense of community and love from the home. They're not getting it from the public education system. If we can't set up a paradigm within the church for it to be received there, people are in the midst of other thousands of other people, but
yeah,
are still alone, and
yeah.
it's such a problem.
Oh, it's huge. It's maybe the main problem. It ties into what we were talking about earlier with that insecurity. When you feel that loneliness is well, think about it. I mean, the devil himself, he's the divider of the brethren, the diabolos. I mean, he divides, he fractures, he breaks apart. Whereas God is three in one. It's communion of persons. God, who is the fullness of being and life and love and everything, is communion, and he brings together, and this is the church. And I mean, this is the core, the basis of everything that is good and beautiful and true. And when we live in a culture that is constantly fracturing and breaking apart and divisive, this is the essence of evil, really, and the pathologies that come along with this and the brokenness. And you're right, that's why we want to create these local communities that value above all else harmony and loyalty, faithfulness, and stability of place, stability of relationships. And this boils down to economics too. Like, I mean, there's so much to say about all of this. But like I said, this is not theoretical, it's not abstract. If you really believe in these things and you value them, they're going to impact real hard decisions that you're going to have to make. So we have people in our community who could be are successful, I mean, professionally, but they turn down career moves or jobs that would take them to another part of the country
Because
because
of the
they're
church.
because of the church all the time. We have people, you'd be shocked how many people who live 35, 40 minutes away, which is not that far in our day and age with cars and everything. We have had numerous people sell their house and move so they could be 5 minutes away. So we've had lots of people visit the church from out of state. We have people from out of state almost every week visit. We have had numerous people go home, pack up their belongings in a U-Haul trailer and come and buy a house.
You know what the thing is? It's like, as I'm speaking to this as a Greek, kind of removed from the isolatory phenomenon of growing up as a youth with that is lacking in America, lacking the social resources, let's call them. And the thing about Greeks is that one day we wake up outside of our mother's womb and we are granted culture that comes in the form of our food, our dance, our music, our sense of community, our sense of hospitality, the way we interact with each other, values, morality, and the church. And I was having this conversation with a priest, I want to say a couple days ago, a couple weeks ago when we were doing the podcast, and I was like, we share everything because we are alike. How do you establish something similar that binds people like this when in every conceivable way they are not alike? And I think you just nailed it down, the Eucharist.
Yeah,
Because it's, even though it's one thing, it is more powerful and transcends everything I just mentioned and then
yeah,
some.
absolutely. And like I mentioned, my family, a big extended family, and we've remained faithful. And it's not we fight, it's like Greeks, we
Families, of
fight,
course.
family, but we're faithful and loyal to each other. But you know what? It's not more important than the church. Our family, my extended family, my immediate extended family, like when we get together for dinner, which we do quite often, there's like 60 people.
That's
It's
so
great.
nice.
It's insane.
That's so
So,
nice.
so, but we have a clear sense that our family relationship is secondary to our relationship with our Christian community. It's secondary. And actually, that's what fuels our family relationship, is because we have our priorities right.
Mm.
And if we could establish this in a local Christian community, um, you know, we could take the world back over. I mean, that's people are so hungry. So I've asked this question. We've had a remarkable, almost miraculous thing happen in our community where almost none of our young people have left the faith.
Thank God.
Actually, they don't even leave the church. Like they don't leave the faith and they don't leave the church. And I mean, it's like literally miraculous. Like I can count on one hand how many. And we've been asking the question for years now, why? How did this happen? you know, and I think it boils down to what you said, connection. It boils down to feeling connected, to establishing these strong ties of connection, of loyalty, of togetherness, of stability, that build a security. When you grow up like that, you feel secure. And
Mm-hmm.
when you feel secure, you're the problems when you're
In every
insecure.
sense of that word, too.
Yes, when you're insecure and you're suffering from deep insecurities, which we all do to a certain extent, it breeds all kind of instability and pathology and mental illness and anxiety and discontent and
And that's the chaotic entropy we try to go to the church to get away from.
yeah. So the church has to be a place of this kind of stability of community, which basically means that we have to work through conflict together. Our highest value is our loyalty. We don't talk, who talks about loyalty? When was the last time you even heard a priest mention the word loyalty? Like I never hear anybody talking about it. It's maybe I'm wrong, but I think we've got to recapture the value of loyalty.
It's just
It's
not a thing in the like this like the concept of honor itself and the children one of the children of honor being loyalty. I don't think it's prevalent in the culture,
yeah.
which is like tragic.
Yeah, it's we've got to reclaim that because it's the basis of our faithfulness to God and to one another. And so I think if we can establish this connectivity within our community, and the Eucharist has to be at the heart of that, then the divine office is then there are concentric rings that there's a culture that sort of like emerges and forms around the Eucharist. And the Eucharist, the sacrifice of the Mass, becomes the nucleus and what I would call the magnetic center. So it's holding everything together. The Eucharist generates the church. It is the womb. It's what constitutes the church. I mean, we come together, as Schmemann said, we leave our homes and go to church to offer the sacrifice of the Mass. And by so doing, we become what we are. We become the church, as Paul says in Corinthians,
And
when
through
you
the
gather as
Eucharist
the
we
church.
become the best parts of ourselves as well.
Yeah, so it becomes that magnetic center that creates the community, and then the community begins to sort of these concentric rings begins to establish a culture, and the divine office, is the canonical hours are basically the handmaiden of the Eucharist. So that's why we pray every single day. We have two offices a day publicly, and then the other things, education, art, music, koinonia, just all the other after
All depart from that center point.
they all flow out from that. Exactly. And so we just did we have an adult Sunday school class that we take pretty seriously. I mean, I do a lot of preparation for it. And it's taught at a pretty, intense level. So we I wanted to teach a class on kingdom culture to describe talk about all these ideas that we're talking about now. And the class
Please
ended up
put it
la
on YouTube. Please record
but
that
it ended
because
up, well, it was 3.5 years.
oh
So
well.
it lasted 3.5 years. But I mean, we had classes on poetry, sacred geometry, economics, politics, prayer rule, prayer life, liturgical. I did a whole year just on the liturgy, going through the liturgy. Um, but it was laying out sort of a whole vision of sort of this establishing this culture centered around the Eucharist for a local community. And I think that this is really the answer that people are searching for. This is the answer that Wendell Berry, who has the same vision in a way, but he doesn't have the Eucharist, so he can't really offer that. And Rod Dreher knows that this is probably the answer, but it doesn't his constituency is like he can't what he would just cut out like it for him to say it.
Yeah, he has to
Um,
be kind of expanded in that way,
yeah,
I
he's got
guess.
be expansive. So, um, but I think that it's at the heart and at the core of everything, and I think we've got to recapture this. And I think even within Orthodoxy, there's become a little bit too much. We've maybe lost it in some places, and too much individualism and maybe too much private. And I have my prayer rope, and I like to try and be a contemplative, and I pray, and I believe in all of that. And like I said, I thought I wanted to be a monk at one point, so I'm not denouncing or putting any of that down. But I think we have to like be thoughtful and prudent about holding the tension between these things. And sometimes our pendulum can kind of swing in one direction or another, and that's inevitable, I guess, with everyone.
So
Um,
here's like kind of the thing though, and I'll kind of tell you what I've heard honestly, not like oh it's like been just going around the grapevine. This is like a 10-year like tragedy that I've seen Go Arch priests weep about in front of me, and the ecumenical patriarchate keeps pretty decent statistics on this sort of thing, where we hear about X double-digit percentage of young people in the Greek Orthodox Church. I'm not denouncing my own culture. I'm sure Rokor or Akrod has these similar issues as well, whatever the case may be. Of this many young people um are not interested in attending church or just don't out of their own volition. And then by the time they reach adulthood and have families, X, high double digit percentage leave the church entirely. And,
Mhm.
like the thing is like every liturgy has communion. So, when we're talking about priests in the context of make like applying what you're saying,
Right.
how do they do it? Like
Yeah.
what's the step? You know what I mean?
There you go. That's the $64,000 question. That's I'm glad you asked that because I mean that's the whole point. So yes, it goes to connection. So the priest's job, and now he's not a magician, he's a man with clay feet trying to do the best he can.
You guys may look like
But
them sometimes, but
but
granted.
the job that we have, the task, I should say, the task that we have before us is we have to weep and pray and sweat and toil and be as creative as we can be and listen to the Holy Spirit and work really hard to do the best to give our people and especially our young people to put them in a position to connect with the worship, to connect with the prayers, to connect with the hymns, to connect with the liturgy, connect with the divine office, to connect with Jesus Christ. We need to try, and we can't give them an experience with Christ. They have to have an experience with Christ. But we have to remove all the debris. We have to remove the stumbling blocks. We have to do everything in our power to put them in the best position to make that connection with Christ. So you can come to Mass, you could come to the Divine Liturgy and not make the connection. So there's a practical ramifications like that implies how fast are you going to chant through the Psalms, right?
Right.
I mean, these are real questions. Now, in the Eastern Rite, you guys have it. I think you might have it a little harder than we do because you just, you know, anyway, that's another discussion.
Byzantine chant is hard enough on its own. Trust me.
But
Yeah.
but I mean, if you're running through the Psalter like a Puerto Rican rabbit on speed, I don't know. Maybe it's fine. Maybe that's not my world. But is that harder to make a connection? It would be for me.
Oh, so here's
Um,
the thing. A lot of chanter. So it's kind of like it's kind of like artist preference,
that was
right? It's
probably not a
like,
politically correct thing to say. I just said,
well, no,
but
no, 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 no. It's a very real conversation because on the ground when you go to Greek parishes, because I grew up in Greek churches and monasteries. It's always this kind of constant tug of war between the priests and the chanters on one side, and then God bless them, I'm sure they're wonderful Orthodox Christians, parishioners on the other side, where one side says, we love the Byzantine hymnology. We want to do it nice and slow. We want to beautify it because beautiful chanting elevates the soul. You know this.
yeah,
And do you have the other side where, maybe it's like older people or like impatient younger, families with impatient younger kids who can only stand sitting in the same place for so long saying, "Hey, why is the liturgy taking this long?" And somewhere in the middle is, kind of like it's kind of like this Hegelian dialectic thing where like, the
yeah,
the synthesis is kind of hanging out in the middle where parishes have to figure out, okay,
yeah,
how do we make this like a beautiful Byzantine liturgy without dragging it out unnecessarily for people who um are unsustainable within it. And that's kind of like it is a very real conversation though. That's not like a bad thing to
right,
talk about.
right. So yeah, so you're bringing up. I'm sure there's lots of things that the priests and the bishops in that world that they've got to figure out. That's not my world. If I was serving in that world, that would be my problem too. But the point is they got to figure it out. I think with the
It's
answer,
done on the individual level. That's
it's not
yeah.
more Greek school is not going to solve the problem. I mean, it's not, that is not the answer. The answer, I know this might sound awfully like hubris for me. What do I know? But this is what I think. The answer is you've got to figure out how to help these young people connect with Jesus Christ in the midst of the liturgy. And that is number one. That is the number one task before you. How are we going to do this? And there might be a million different answers. There might be some education. It might be some, talking more. It might be looking at our music, looking at how we're
Here's
chanting.
my angle. How much of that starts in the home?
A lot of it starts in the home, but you can't. you have only a certain amount of control over that. But yes, it does start in the home. So I mean,
For
if the
better or worse, I mean, like how much does the aversion or attraction to it start
right,
within
well,
the family dynamic?
it's huge. It's huge. But the priest only has, and he can be trying to address that front, and he needs to address the domestic church and re-evangelizing the parents. But we don't need to lower the bar. That's the tendency, is to just lower the bar. We think lowering the bar is going to pacify people or make them more interested. It's not going to make them more interested. Raise the bar.
And I think the application of that is like a fear reaction because they're like, oh, we like I mean, obviously like hierarchs and priests don't want to lose people and they're just like, how do we at least keep them around so they can receive Christ?
Raise the
It's like
bar. Yeah,
I hope that's the answer. I sincerely do because it would be making both sides of that coin happy, you know?
yeah. I think, look at the young people that are coming to the church today. They're coming into Orthodoxy because they're tired of the fog machine, entertainment, mega church situation.
They're tired of nihilism. They're
They're
they
they're
because they have nothing outside of this
they're looking for
sometimes.
something that requires something of them. They're looking for something real. So I think that we can't apologize for the faith. We need to like preach the faith and the gospel with great vigor. It's the source of our joy, and we have to, raise the bar, not lower the bar. But we do have to be very conscientious about how we help these young people connect with Christ, both in the liturgy and then in our education, like catechesis, and then in our thing like connecting with relationships within the parish.
Okay,
And
let's play a game. Let's play a game. So, let just hypothetically, if you were dealing with a parish, you have 35 to 50 14 to like 24-year-olds, let's say. Most of them are there out of obligation to family, generally disinterested in theology and patristics. What's the first step?
ooh,
That's a fun one,
um,
isn't it?
yeah. I mean, I think I don't know if there's a formula. I don't know if there's a formula, but I think that the first step has to be kind of an inspiring an inspiring catechesis, like trying to
I
sit down
agree.
with them and recatechize them through metaphysics about what they really are desiring and what they want out of life, and
Exactly.
and trying to sow that vision into them, give them a vision for what a beautiful life is really could really look like. So I think that along with I would try to also scare the hell out of them. So I would do both at the same time, and I have a way of doing that actually. So I would try and give them a vision for a beautiful life and what they really desire deep in their heart. Try and connect with that. So again, it's all about connections. Every human being deep in their soul wants this. They want the fullness of life. They want to be fully alive. They want to know God. Uh, they just don't realize that's what they want. And we need to somehow reach into their soul and somehow poke that. We got to find that spot, and we got to press it, and we got to begin to open up their eyes to this, and inspire them with it. And then at the same time we're doing that, we need to scare the hell out of them. And the way you do that, and I started doing this with our kids at a pretty young age. I mean, depends on the kids and the maturity level, but you can start when they're like 10 years old. Basically, what I teach them is this, and I learned this. This kind of came to me through hearing confessions. I hear a lot of confessions and life confessions too. And I'd be hearing somebody's life confession, they're 40, 50 years old, and they're talking about how they're screwed up and they've had a tough life and their struggles and their pathologies and whatever, mental, stuff, struggles. And as you're talking about it all goes back to when they were 10 years old or 16 years
Really?
old. Not always, but I mean, often. Enough times that it's caused me to start to think about this. And they'll describe something that happened in their youth, and maybe they hit a rough patch or something bad happened, and they decided to get bitter. They got bitter against God or
Hmm.
something, or angry, or resentful. And this decision that they made when they were maybe 10, 12, 15 years old has set them on a trajectory their whole life, that's kind of been in the wrong direction, that's created all kinds of problems for them. And as I began to hear this over and over and over again, it occurred to me that young people are human beings. We don't think of young people as kids as human beings. We think of them as it's like a different category.
Yeah.
Like they
Isn't
become a
it?
human being when they're like turn 18 or something. And I never felt that way. I talk to my kids, 6 kids. I've always talked to my kids from the time they were very young, like adults.
I've always heard that was the right way to do it.
Yeah, I speak to them like with respect, but it also means I speak very directly and I expect a lot from them. So I speak to them very frankly. So, and that's the way I talk to my parishioners too, you know. Like if they're not giving or tithing, I just get up and say, look, you call yourself a Christian. If you are not generous and don't give, what's the most important thing that we know about God is that he's generous. He gave his only begotten son. If you're not giving and you calling yourself a Christian, we got a real problem here. That's how I talk to my parishioners.
And that's refreshing because
Yeah.
it's not too distantly when I had a conversation with another priest about, what that element of the Christian life means to the parishioner and how the priest is supposed to kind of navigate that dynamic because in Orthodoxy, coming from Greek cultures where people fight about giving each other money instead of taking it, in America the atmosphere around cash is very different. It's like it's this thing that like is requested and kind of withdrawn and held very what's the right word here? Very like you need to be very direct about the intention of it. Like it's not
Yeah.
like, you give from the heart out of generosity and love. Like it doesn't exist very often here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and my point in bringing that up was, and I don't talk to the parishioners like that all the time, just when it's necessary. But my point is I think that part of showing respect for a person is to be direct and straightforward, and to assume that they're interested in having a frank and honest and conversation. And so I always spoke to my children that way. So this gets to my point. This is how you scare the hell out of them. So uh, I realized that a 10-year-old can make decisions because they're a human being that can send them
Who
on a
would have
bad
guessed?
trajectory for the rest of their life. And so I thought, you know what? What if I started warning them about this at a young age? And so Jesus says in the Gospels, he says, "Ye are gods," right? Now that's a interesting, difficult passage. Ye are gods. What's he talking about there? Well, whatever else he might be saying, and I'm not claiming to have like the only right interpretation of this, but whatever else he might be saying by that, one aspect that I think is workable is that we in a sense have a godlike power as part of our nature, that God created us in his image. And so being created in the image of in likeness of God, but in the image of God, he imbued us with a godlike power. And this godlike power is the power to love. Okay. So if we have the power to love, we also have the power not to love. And so this is a godlike power because it's sort of absolute.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no other being that can remove that power for you or that can override the power. Nobody can keep you from loving God, and nobody can make you love God. Not even God himself. God can't make you love him because then that would be an act of violence, which wouldn't be love.
Which is something in our hymnography that
Right.
the angels like look upon us and wonder how we have this sense of, I guess,
Right.
decision making.
Yes. So is this ye are gods. So this is one way that I sort of applied this. So we have this godlike power to love. And a 10-year-old has it. Right? It's not like you get it when you're 18. Now, I don't know how to deal with like a 3-year-old, but it doesn't matter for this particular conversation. So a kid, let's take a 15-year-old. A 15-year-old kid thinks that everybody is trying to control them. Their parents are trying to control them. Their teachers are trying to control them. Their priest is trying to control them. Everybody's trying to control them and make them do what they think they should do.
I have a
And
quick
that's
question about that. I hate to interrupt you, but do you, I've been thinking about this too. Do you think that is a natural occurrence of age, or do you think that's environmentally encouraged and signaled to them that that's the appropriate, I guess, mindset of that time?
well, no, I just think it's a reality. I
Okay.
mean, we are trying to control them. Like, that's the whole point. So that's what I was getting ready to say. The
Right.
the 15-year-old thinks that his parents are trying to control him, the priest is trying to control him, the teachers are, and they are. Like, I mean, in a sense, so that the kid's right. This is where the kid makes the mistake. This is the critical mistake. The kid thinks subconsciously that the parent and the priest can control them
Mm.
mistakenly. So the kid thinks if I go down this dark alley, like if I go start playing with fire, like if I go toying with sin or unbelief or whatever the case may be, mom's going to come get me and rescue me. Or father so and so is going to come pull me out of the dark alley and save me. Okay. This is where you scare the hell out of them. So in their subconscious, they can tempt fate. They can kind of like head down this path of rebellion, thinking that somebody's going to get them out of it if they get so lost down there that they can't make their way back out. Somebody will come nab them by the back of the nape of the neck and pull them out. Right? This is what they think. So what I tell our kids is that if they're hell bent on going down there, nobody can rescue them because of this godlike power.
That's very true.
So,
I think God still does that for people
well,
sometimes.
well, he can't do it as an act of violence. What God does in
Okay.
his providence, God in his loving providence, he massages the circumstances of life to give everybody the absolute best opportunity to repent of their sin and to turn to him and love him. And when he does that, they don't have to walk all the way back out the alley. Doesn't matter how far off the path they've gotten. It's one step back to the right path.
Hmm.
But he can't force it because force is alien to love.
Mm.
So 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 basically, when a young person begins to sort of understand this concept, this truth, this reality, and they understand their own role that they play and the decisions that they're making in their life, it scares them in a good way. You know, they're like, if I'm watching horror movies every night, or I'm watching, sexually explicit stuff, or this kind of thing, and they are thinking, somebody will come rescue me. I mean, I'll get deeply involved in this and it'll start to work on me, but I'll find my way out, or somebody will come get me and pull me out of it. And when they realize that at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones responsible, nobody else. They're going to be the ones responsible for whether they got so far down the path that they can't get back out. It scares them. Like,
That's
it
the
wakes them
initiation
up.
of maturity.
Yeah. So I start talking to young people about this when they're pretty young, and I found it to be very effective, actually. You know, they young people who are otherwise maybe not all that pious, they don't want to lose their faith. Like, nobody really sets out to lose their faith. When you warn them that if you keep on going down this path, there's a good chance you could lose your faith, and there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to stop it, or I cannot going to rescue you. I mean, I'll try, but I'm not capable of it. That scares them. And then they begin to take responsibility for it. And it becomes a great tool, I think, for helping us to, keep us on the straight and narrow. So
Yeah.
anyway, so back to your question about these 40 young people. I think trying to instill in them a vision for what the beautiful life that they desire truly is and how to achieve it. And at the same time, the flip side of that is sort of scaring them about the alternative of losing out on that beautiful life and not moralizing with them. It's how you do it. It's like, how do you do that? Well, I can't explain that in this conversation, but there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it. It's not about like just beating them up and moralizing with them. You have to somehow speak to their soul. You have to do it in a way that brings a sort of a winsome way, not just beating up on them or nagging them or coming down on them. You have to do it in a way that inspires them, that they can see the truth. And so that's how I would begin. Is
What if
probably
would you laugh if I said at 25 years old maybe I just needed to hear that?
well, I need to hear it. So we all need to hear it every day, probably. But
The correct
it's
attitude though. I like that. I really really like that. I wish I would have given you like a digital whiteboard for all this because I mean I should start doing that for some of my guests.
no.
But yeah, yeah, I think that's the ticket. I really do. So anyway, you and your wife spend 10 more years in this parish
Oh my gosh, yes.
that we were just on. Well, yeah, so you guys spent some more time there. Let's pick up where we left off.
Yeah. We worked and worked so hard and loved the church and just were on our way and I discovered Orthodoxy and started teaching. I read all the books I could
How'd you
find
find
and
Orthodoxy? How did you
well
encounter
from
it?
Dostoevsky.
Oh, well, I
I
mean,
was yeah, so I read that and then I started researching Orthodoxy and I visited churches. I audited classes at seminaries. I found a monastery and would go there for Vespers every Saturday. And I started teaching, Light and Life, that book catalog. This is before the internet, you could buy books on the internet much. So Light and Life catalog I used to buy books from them, and I read all of Schmeemann's books, and of course Ware and Florovsky and Meindorf and
those were
Bulgakov.
the big four for a while, yeah.
Yeah, those were the books I was reading, mostly Russian stuff. And I just adopted it all hook, line, and sinker. And really, I didn't really have any hangups, theological hangups. I embraced the ecclesiology as I understood it, but still wasn't ready to become Orthodox for several reasons. For years actually. Even though there wasn't really it wasn't like I had a problem with Mary or the saints or the theology, nothing like that. I was all in, and I was teaching all of this stuff in the church so I was an associate pastor basically from 1986 on, and also working as a blacksmith and applying my trade in that field. And so for the first so this is 1990 once I sort of fell into the Orthodox track. I adopted a very anti-Western sort of attitude from day one because I got it from the books. That's what I was getting. So like
Ironic in retrospect, huh?
more ironic than you could imagine. So it wasn't just a mild anti-Western rhetoric. I mean, as an evangelist, I have an evangelist heart. So wanting everybody to become Orthodox, I adopted this whole define Orthodoxy by what we're not, like our apologetics was polemics and by tearing down the other side and Western Christianity and the evils of Western Christianity and how far it had fallen from the true faith. And I became quite lacerating and pretty good actually in my apologetics on all this stuff. And I tell people, they laugh now because I'm a Western Rite priest. I said I was the most anti-Western SOB you ever met. I could have been some of these modern, anti-Western people's sensei back in the day. So this went on for about 7 years, seven or eight
What was
years.
that spurred on by?
The books I read, it was what I was digesting. So
Mm,
basically, in almost all modern Orthodox books, there's an anti-Western bias. I mean, it's everywhere. Losky, you know, I mean, the stuff he says about Anselm, for example. I don't want to get into all that right now, but
sure.
um, it's in everything. It's even if it's not overt. Usually, it's just overt. But even when it's not overt, it's read between the lines. It's intimated on every
Implied.
page.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's just everywhere. And so I adopted it all. I swallowed it all. So after about 7 years of really honing my anti-Western, polemics, I remember By the way, we went and joined the Charismatic Episcopal Church after 10 years. That church I helped start ended up doing an about face and sort of rejecting this path towards apostolic Christianity. So we ended up joining the Charismatic Episcopal Church in 1996, 10 years after the 1986. And this was a group that was continuing in the same journey, but maybe doing it a little bit more seriously, looking for apostolic Christianity. And by then I was like the Orthodox guy, right? I'm not Orthodox, but I'm not in communion with Orthodox, but theologically I'm the Orthodox guy in our circles. So I started to feel something sick in the pit of my stomach about this time. And I didn't know what it was. And I just started to feel convicted. Something wasn't right. And soon I began to realize it was about my attitudes towards Christians who weren't Orthodox, Western Christianity, the Pope, Catholics, whoever.
Mm.
And I just started to feel convicted that it was just kind of a very unchristian, ugly, attitude. It wasn't right. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know how to reconcile it with my beliefs about Orthodoxy being the one true faith and Western Christianity having gone off the rails. And I didn't know what to do. So this is like back when I was telling you before I didn't know what to do. So I just, about the wife. So I had numerous experiences like this. I had also with Mary, the same thing happened. I said, Lord, I don't know what to do, but I'm convicted that my attitudes are not pleasing to you. So I thought, what can I do? I didn't have anybody to guide me. So I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pray for the Pope every day. So I thought, it'd be difficult to pray for somebody and also hate them at the same time, which is actually very accurate. So I started praying for the Pope. And it's not like I became a lover of Roman Catholic stuff or of the Pope, but it just began to change my attitude towards the Pope and the
Pray for your
papacy.
enemies kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And my attitude slowly started to change. And over time, I began to realize that some of the stuff I had ingested from Orthodox sources that had a very strong anti-Western sentiment and polemic, I started to question it and say, wonder if this is all. So I started to read more broadly and widely and realized that there were various streams within the Orthodox world. It wasn't just the Russian stream and the Slavophiles. I mean, there's other theologians and writers and the fathers. I was reading more broadly, and I began to sort of change my attitude about the West a little bit. And then I began to wrestle with the question of Orthodox claims to be the one true church, to be the Catholic Church. I mean, we do call ourselves the Catholic Church. We are the true Catholic Church. And I thought about Catholicity, and I thought if the Orthodox Church is the true church for all men, for all places, for all times, for all peoples, for all cultures, and if the church was one and had this Catholicity of liturgies and expressions and cultures and languages, but now to be a part of the Catholic Church, the one apostolic, Catholic Church, you had to pretty much become Russian or Greek or whatever, Byzantine, and you had to eschew all of that and dismiss all of it and denounce it even. That became a huge stumbling block for me.
And it is for a lot of
Huge.
other people coming to the church, from what I've been hearing.
Oh, it's a stumbling block for, I would say, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions. So it's not a few. It's massive amounts. And it became the stumbling block, which I think kept me out of the church for another 10 years. So we're going on 20 years now. So I began to wrestle with that question. Now, for 10 years, I wrestled with that question. And I started posing that question to everybody I met. Monks, bishops, Orthodox monks, bishops, priests, everybody I could find.
Have you ever had an encounter with the Ephraimite monasteries?
I visited one many years ago in Florida, but that was after I was Orthodox.
Oh, Okella, my cousin's a nun there.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But yeah, I was Orthodox at the time when we visited there. So everybody I would meet, I would put the question like this, and it's a poetic question, but I was like, why do I have to become Russian in order to be part of the Catholic Church, Catholic Orthodox Church? And every single person I asked for 10 years basically tried to convince me why it was right and good that I should have to become Russian or Greek or whatever to be a part of the Catholic faith.
Mm.
And I just wasn't buying it. I would listen to their answers. And some of these people I was talking to over years, the same people. And some of these people were very bright, very important theologians and smart people. And I just walk away thinking, I'm not very educated and I'm not very smart, but I ain't buying what you're telling me. There's something wrong with this. So I wrestled with this on my own for years. And to be honest, I was a little pissed off about it, still am, because these people kept me out of the church.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
shouldn't say that, but I mean, God has his ways. But I tell them, they're all my friends now. I tell them as a joke. I'm like, look, you didn't give me the right answer. And I had to figure it out on my own, like wrestling with God, like Jacob with the angel in my bed at night, wrestling with tears, with prayers, and I couldn't figure it out. So I was trying to come up with an answer why it was right and good, why I had to become this or that to be part of the Catholic faith. And I couldn't come up with an answer, and their answers weren't helpful. Until one day, literally like a light switch, after 10 years of wrestling with this question, the answer came to me. And I couldn't believe it. It was so simple and so clear, and a million-pound weight lifted. And as soon as the answer came to my mind, I was ready to become Orthodox.
What was the answer?
It's not right or good, but you still have to do it.
Yes.
So, and the reason you have to do it, so the actual answer is because of sin.
Mm.
Because of the sin of the schism. This is the historical context we're in. I was trying to philosophize about it. They were trying to philosophize about it. They were trying to provide an answer for why it's right and good. That's not why. The reason you got to do it is because there was a schism, whatever that means. Okay, I don't think we actually know. But there was a schism. There was a breach in communion, fell along geographic lines, and the East got it right, or more right than the West did. So fast forward, 1,000 years, whatever, here we are in Western lands, and Westerners and people who didn't grow up Orthodox are encountering the Orthodox Church, and they're saying, good Lord, this is the faith. This is what we've been missing. This is the fullness and the purity of the faith that we've always desired. We want to become, Orthodox. But just because of the accidents of history, and everything, it happens to be Russian and Greek and Byzantine and Arab, and these are the accidents, not the substance, but the accidents of the pure church as it exists today. And these people want to become a part of it, and so they pretty much have to just they have to accept the reality of the situation. But it should have never been this way. It's because of sin. If the schism had never happened, this wouldn't be the situation we'd be in.
The Great Divorce, as I've heard it called.
Yeah. So we have this situation. So the simple answer to the question about why do I have to become Russian is because of sin, because of the sin of the schism. Not because it's right or good. Now, it's right or good in the sense that it's the right thing to do, and
We
it's a
kept the
good thing
purity
to
of the
do.
faith, but yeah.
But it's not in the ultimate sense, it's not right or good. But nothing's right or good in the ultimate sense. We live in a corrupt, fallen world. You're going to die. I'm going to die. We're all going to die. Despite the fact that Christ is risen from the dead and has destroyed death, we're still going to die. Okay? This is not, now God has, in his providence and power of his love, he's transformed our death into a gateway into eternal life and immortality. So he's turned the evil into something good. And that's what he does all the time. But the fact that we die was never good in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's the result of sin. It's the great enemy. And so the context that we're in today with people who want to embrace the fullness of the Orthodox faith and life and the church. Um, so I'll tell you. So when I figured this out, which was very simple, once I figured it out, I was ready to become Orthodox. So I give you one anecdotal story. You can multiply this times 100. This young couple, they show up at church 10 years ago, and they're now pillars of our community. In fact, I'm going to bless their house this afternoon. So they walk in, never met them before. And later, I found out, after I got to know them, that they had been visiting the Orthodox Church 30 minutes down the road. And they had been meeting with the priest there for 6 months. They met every month for about 4 or 5 hours. So, however many hours they spent, 60, 70 hours
Sure.
arguing with this priest. And the wife, these are very smart people too, very intelligent, perceptive, educated people. The wife, the husband's ready to take the leap, but the wife was the one resistant. And she kept saying, why do I, if this is the Catholic faith, why do I have to become Russian to be part of the Catholic faith? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And he kept trying to tell her why it was right and good. And she wasn't buying it. Same story as me. So they come to St. Patrick's. And I go up to meet them afterwards. I said, hey, I'm glad you're here. And she's a real tough lady. And she says to me, this is the first time we meet. No nicey nicey. She just immediately says, I got a question for you. I'm like, okay, what's your question? And she asked me the question. Why do we have to, why do we have to become Russian or Greek or whatever to be a part of the Catholic faith? And I said, oh, I can answer that. And her eyes got big as saucers. This is after 6 months with this other priest. Oh, by the way, the other priest finally said, I'm getting nowhere with y'all. Y'all go see Father Patrick Cardine. It's a half an hour away, but just go. Maybe he
And
could
he was
talk
like
some.
cool with you about it. Like he was like, yeah, can you like handle this?
He sent them to me. He said, maybe he can talk some sense into you. Right.
Right.
So he sent them over there. So she said, why? And I said, I can answer the question for you. And she said, okay. I said, does it upset you? She said, yes. I said, good, it should. I said, does it even make you a little angry? I said, is it confused? She said, yes. I said, good. If it doesn't, then there's actually something wrong with you. Now, that's going to offend some people, but people have baggage. Okay. I understand people need to leave their former life to get free, and God does that, and that's the mercy of God. But it's, anyway, there's
Well,
baggage.
listen, I'm a Greek. I was raised up from the ground
Right.
next to a goat eating like a tree somewhere, and that's
Yeah,
that's kind
yeah,
of how I
yeah.
came. Yeah, so
Right. Yeah. So anyway, moving on though. So I spent 90 seconds, literally a minute and a half, saying, look, it's not right or good. It's because of the sin of the schism, but the East got it right. And fast forward to today, and this is the church. This is the fullness of the church. So it's just the accidents of history. This is just what's happened. This is the reality of the situation. And so if you want to experience and participate in the fullness of Christ's church, then that's what you got to do. You just got to suck it up. And I said, now in your case, there's a Western Rite church locally, so you actually don't have to do that. But for most people, that's what they have to do.
I
And
go ahead. Sorry, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
so I said, you just got to suck it up. If you want to be part of the church, you just got to suck it up. And if you love the Eastern liturgy, that's great. You love it. That's wonderful. If you don't like it, tough. Learn to like it. And because this is a church. And she looked at the ground. This is after 6 months, 60 hours with that other priest, 90 seconds with me. She looks at the ground. She says, that makes perfect sense to me. I can accept that. When's catechism class begin? Now, I'm not making any of that up. That's all what happened. And that has happened dozens of times. And I've talked to my brother priests, my Eastern Rite friend, and all my friends are Eastern Rite priests. Talked to all my brother priests and told them, I'm like, guys, stop telling people who are showing up your door that that it's not weird for them to have to become like partially Russian to be part of the Catholic faith. Stop telling them it's not weird. It's weird.
Yeah,
Just tell them, say, if this is upsetting to you, I understand. It makes sense that it would be a little upsetting. But this is
okay.
a situation.
So I have a question. I think you're the right person to ask this question. It's going to come off as slightly derogatory and a little bit mean, not towards you, just in a general sense.
Sure.
So here's the thing. What you said is completely true. Do you, what would your response be to somebody who kind of looked at the Western Rite and said, Like say for example, like the sheer volume of Eastern Rite churches were replaced by Western Rite churches. Would would you look at like an American and like would what would your response be to them saying, "Oh, well, I have to become English or Italian like to be is the Western Rite you think entrenched in the ethnic ethos of just a different set of nations, or do you feel like it's a transcendent kind of element to kind of the Western metasphere of thought as the Byzantine liturgy is to the East? And I'm asking that like sincerely.
That's a really interesting question. Never been asked that question before. Ha!
I
That's
hope it didn't come off like I was like trying to,
no,
but
no,
like you
no,
see my
no.
point.
No. That's a fascinating question. No, I think that I think both and I think both the Eastern liturgies and the Western liturgies, because there's more than one liturgy, and there's more than one language, and more than one culture. That just real quickly, this is a misnomer, misunderstanding that there is an Orthodox culture. There are Orthodox cultures.
Agreed, completely.
So that's very important. And they're different liturgies, different languages, and the accidents, which, using Aristotelian sort of like categories, you have accidents and substance. The substance is the same across the board. That's the
Yeah, but they're
dogma.
beautiful in their differences. They have things to
But
offer each
yes,
other.
but the
Yeah.
accidents are different. And so the piety is expressed differently. We genuflect, y'all do a metania. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It expresses the same thing, but it expresses it differently. And so I think that all apostolic, Orthodox, traditional, liturgies, East and West, are transcendent of culture in their essence, substance, and dogma. But they also are all particular in their accidents, and they all have been formed and shaped and evolved and developed by the Holy Spirit in a particularity of place and time and culture and language, and that cannot be ignored. And we don't ignore it as Orthodox Christians. In fact, as Orthodox Christians, we highly value that particularity. And in fact, this is a double-edged sword for Byzantine people or Eastern people. The Eastern people value it so highly that sometimes they make the mistake. Well, I wouldn't say sometimes. I would say this is actually the great fault of Orthodoxy, is to dogmatize the accidents.
I've seen it.
Okay, well, it's everywhere. I mean, we invented, I'm going to say we, because this is my family too. We invented an entire genre of literature called the Byzantine lists, which essentially does this.
The errors of the Latin, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
your beard's not long enough, you're not Orthodox. You don't fast on Saturday, you're not Orthodox. You have a depiction of a lamb, on your altar, you're not Orthodox. So
See,
so these
it's so weird because like it's almost like this is gonna sound if this sounds really bad, feel free to just like stop me. It's almost like God in particular spaces, in particular spheres, allows um dogma to kind of be culturally particular to a people. Like the beard thing, for example. This is what made me think about it. It's like Saint, like, there's like theological um precedent as far as the Greeks are concerned with this because Saint Nectarius of Egina talks about how the hair of a priest is so holy that it's not to be cut. And there's kind of like a spiritual
yeah,
element somewhere in that.
right.
And now not to necessarily say that that applies everywhere, but like as far as like Greek orthodoxy is concerned, that might be true, and it might also, and it like it can be true in other places, but like it may not be particularly correct universally. And I'm not articulating this
No.
correctly,
I
but
think you're onto something important. So the dogma is the same. The capital T tradition is the same. The accidents are different, but it doesn't make the accidents unimportant. The dogma flows back through the accidents. The accidents become signs. The accidents become conveyors of the essence of the truth. Okay, so your the way you pray, your musical tradition, these sorts of things, the ritual, the ceremony, the various signs that make up sort of the culture of how the life is lived and expressed, they are imbued with a certain holy, sacred, venerable fragrance of holiness. So they're taken extremely seriously. We don't change them willy-nilly. We're very conservative with them, but we do not dogmatize them. Because they're not dogmatic. They can be different in different places and in different times. And so there's a tension there between having great respect and a sort of conservatism for the venerable ancient traditions and customs and instruments of the faith through which it's been expressed. While at the same time, I'll give you an example, anecdotal. I'm in Russia with a buddy of mine who's now also an Orthodox priest. And we're preaching and we got cassocks on, and I have a pectoral cross on. He does not have a pectoral cross on. Now, as you know, in the Antiochian church, you don't wear a pectoral cross until you're an archpriest.
Yeah, they have like time gates to
Yeah.
it, or rankings, yes.
In other jurisdictions, everybody wears a pectoral. It's different. These are different. Even within Eastern Orthodoxy, you have
The
different
Greeks the
traditions.
Greeks get flashy with theirs no matter how long they've
Yeah.
been in, which is
So
nice, but
So, so we're there, and there's a big crowd there, and he gets up to preach with an interpreter, and there's a woman in the front row. She happens to be the wife of the priest. She's the matushka. So he starts to preach, and she jumps up out of her seat and starts yelling and hollering and screaming, shuts the whole meeting down. So we have to have a little powwow. Call her and her husband up. We get the interpreter down. We get in a little circle down at the bottom of the platform, and we find out, Matushka, what's the matter? Why are you screaming? Why you won't let him preach? And she says, he's not wearing a cross. No cross, you can't preach.
mm,
So we're like, okay. So I took my cross off and I put it on my friend, and he put the cross. And she says, okay, now you can preach. So this is not an anomaly, okay? This is not an anomaly. This is very typical, especially in Russia. Even in the Pentecostal world, if you wear a tie in a Pentecostal church in Russia, like you can create a church split because it points to hell.
mm.
Seriously, if they clap in a church, in a Pentecostal church in Russia, same thing. So there is in this psyche of this culture, these people, which is a great thing, I think. It's a great thing. It's one of our hallmarks, is that these traditions, these customs, what I'm going to call the accidents, like whether you genuflect or do a metania, you don't kneel on Sunday. We kneel on Sunday. Okay. It's a different expression of piety. So these things become very sacred to us, and they become imbued with a great sacredness to us.
And what I'm happy about is because a lot of the times, and I'm not, I guess, necessarily degrading people that do this, but like a lot of the times when this conversation occurs, people will look at these, um, you know, small T traditions or whatever
Yeah.
and kind of flippantly dismiss them as
Yeah.
superstitions that are to be done away with for a
No,
universal Orthodox Church, which I
no,
think is the wrong attitude. But you're giving
no.
it more credence than,
No, no,
you
no, they're
know.
very valuable. I think that it's deeply important, our particularity. We are very concerned about particulars because and this has to do with the incarnation. Christ embodied a certain flesh, not, and he was the son of a certain woman. And the particularity of our faith and how we do things is very important. But we can't confuse, but it is varied. There's a universality to it. We are not fundamentalists. We're not narrow-minded people. In the other sense, we're not we're not reductionists. We're not ghetto makers. And this is what's happened in the Orthodox world among a certain sector of Orthodox people who, especially converts, who've come in and they brought with them their pathological fundamentalism with them, and they've applied it within the Orthodox sphere.
I'm a little dim, so what do you mean, like as an example, I guess?
Well, just all these, this sort of narrow-minded, like if you don't have a certain length, about what makes you Orthodox and not Orthodox.
And they apply it across the board.
Yeah, Yeah.
Okay, got
And
you.
this is antithetical to our Christian faith. Antithetical. If that's what it means to be Orthodox, I mean, I don't even recognize that. So, I don't want to go stepping on anybody's toes here,
I
but
understand what you mean, though. I do.
the phronema stuff. Yes, we phronema. Paul says we have the mind of Christ. What does that mean? I don't know what most people mean by that when they're talking about an Orthodox phronema. They just use it. It's used so often as a way to just denounce our opponents and say, well, you don't have an Orthodox phronema. And then somebody says, well, what is an Orthodox phronema? And the answer usually is, well, when you have it, you'll know. That's
I,
awfully
well,
like we can't explain it. We just know you don't have it, and when you got it, then you'll know that you got
I,
it.
I think a decent way to explain it within a contemporary, I guess, framework, because as a Greek, I hear this word as much as I hear, bread and water. Like it's very common for us to throw that term around. And I think it might be a combination as far as the Hellenics are concerned. Um, the the Greek orientational approach to the Orthodox religion combined with the clarity that one receives from participating in the sacramental life. And it has its uses, but to impose that and to say that it manifests the same everywhere is just not the case, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be.
Well, let me get into a specific on this. So let's ramp it up. Let's say somebody listening says, "Okay, Father, I can accept that if you want to genuflect and we want to do a metania, that these are not mutually exclusive.
I'm so
These
sorry.
can
What
be
is genuflection? This
That's
is new
what
to me.
we bow on the right knee or we bow on both knees. We go touch our knee to the ground.
Oh, that's kind of cool, like a knight. Okay, I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's cool.
And yes, it's an act of, every knee shall bow, as Paul
Oh,
says.
okay, I like it.
So we kneel a lot. That's one of the pietistic expressions. We kneel at the altar rail when we receive communion. I mean, if somebody tried to get rid of our altar rail or our ability to kneel to receive communion, I would fall on my sword. Like I can't tell you how important that is to my piety. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't even begin to express to you.
I can
So
sympathize with it. I mean, it's the body of Christ, so I
I
mean,
mean,
yeah.
imagine somebody told you you're not allowed to do Matanyas anymore. I mean, you'd be
Oh,
like, it's really
I
like,
mean, maybe
what?
it would save my knees a little bit, but I
You
mean, besides
know?
that, yeah.
So, these things are deeply embedded in our expression of piety, and they become very, very much, connected with our love of Christ. So, at any rate, but let's move to a tier above here. Now we're going to go from like just maybe like how we kneel to something a little bit more a little weightier. The liturgy itself and the architecture of the building. So the Byzantine liturgy and the Western liturgy reflect on and articulate and expressed or manifest the great mystery of salvation and Christ's atoning, and I just use the word atoning there on purpose, Christ's atoning work differently. Okay. They accentuate different aspects because this is a great mystery that is, inexhaustible. And our liturgy expresses aspects of this, and it even has flowed into our architecture. Um, so in this, I'm speaking in a very general terms, but I think this is quite accurate. The Byzantine liturgy, you walk in and you see Christ Pantocrator, and really the entire feel and liturgical sort of like emphases and the Christological sort of emphasis is on Christ, the divine Christ, the divine Logos. The divine Logos come down from heaven. And this is accentuated by Orthodox speakers all the time when they talk about this. And they talk about the dome, and this is heaven coming down. Now, let's remind ourselves, we inherited this from pagans, this dome. It was not our invention. We inherited it and baptized it
Well,
from pagans.
architectural logos spermakos, let's put it that way,
So So we inherited and baptized it, which is what the church does, by the way. So that's not a pejorative statement. That's our glory. Everything belongs to us. Everything that's good belongs to
Everything good
us.
belongs to us, yes.
So and we take whatever we want. Like, I always tell people if we're out, if we're kids and I want your red bike, I just take it because it belongs to my dad, because my dad's bigger than your dad. So we take whatever we want.
And our God is bigger than everybody else's, so it's
Yeah,
kind
that's the
yeah,
point.
we get to bully
So
people.
so but the Byzantine dome is inherited from pagans, but it's adopted by the church, by the early church, and it's theologized. The dome is used to sort of emphasize this coming down of heaven, and to this very day, you go to any church, Orthodox church catechism class or somebody's podcast, and they're talking about church architecture, and they talk about how the emphasis of our liturgy is all about heaven coming down and about Christ, the divine Logos, who's come down from heaven and brought heaven down. And this is emphasized, and it is. And then what they'll do, those who are a little more polemical, which is most of them, they will then talk about Western Christianity. And we emphasize the resurrection and all of this. But in the Western Christianity, it's they've lost this emphasis, and you have Gothic architecture with the spires, and everything's going vertical and up, and it's because they don't understand heaven on earth, and heaven is the church is in heaven, and heaven coming down. This is all nonsense, absolute utter nonsense. In fact, it's slanderous. In fact, it's sort of self-harm, because the Western liturgy has a different emphasis in its expression of
What's the
Christology.
differentiation? Yeah.
So the Western liturgy emphasizes Christ as mediator, emphasizes Christ as man, who is God, who takes us up. Okay.
Mm.
And this is the emphasis in every single prayer in our church. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Every single prayer is on the mediatorship of Christ, the human who is God, who carries man up. That's why the Feast of the Ascension is actually a much bigger deal in the West than it is in the East. That might surprise you, actually.
It's not shocking, but when I really
So,
think about it,
so,
it's important to us to be sure, but it's
well,
not,
yeah, of course it's important, but
it's not like Theophany where we have guys jumping
yeah,
in the water and so
yeah,
yeah.
it in the West, it's a major, 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 major emphasis. So, according to Eastern Rite priests and theologians whom I trust and respect, the Byzantine liturgy actually has very little emphasis on Christ as mediator. Almost all of the emphasis is on Christ, the divine Logos, coming down, whereas the Western liturgy really emphasizes the mediator Christ taking us up. This eventually bears out architecturally in Gothic architecture. And I've heard an Orthodox historian talking about the Gothic architecture is like satanic, or devoid of the spirit. It is absolute nonsense. Gothic architecture is a reflection of the Western liturgy, which emphasizes the man who is God, Jesus Christ, as our mediator, and and his holy sacrifice being carried up to the heavenly altar and presented to the Father. Even in our liturgy, we have a prayer that comes, which some people call the ascending epiclesis, where we ask that the holy angels would take the holy gifts that have been transformed in the body and blood of Christ and carry them up to the heavenly altar and present them to the Father on the heavenly altar.
That's really cool.
It's amazingly
I like that.
mystical. It's actually, there's so many misnomers. It's actually, in a way, a little bit more mystical than the descending epiclesis. In the Byzantine liturgy, we're asking for the Holy Spirit to come down and transform these gifts, which is, I don't want to sound pejorative at all. This is beautiful. We believe in, this is a beautiful prayer. It's important and we love it. It's part of our prayer. But in the Western liturgy, it's just one of these misnomers that the West is always rationalistic and the East is always mystical. It's actually not true. In the early West, even in the liturgy, things are not explained as much in the liturgy as they are in the East, because a lot of the prayers in the East were written and developed in response as sort of a response to heresy. That didn't happen in the West because there weren't that many heresies, and the liturgy is older. It didn't develop as much as it did in the East. So the prayers they really don't have that much sort of like polemics in them.
Mm.
Um, and even the gifts are seen as being transformed as God accepts them. It's through God's reception of the gifts as being holy and pure and true that they are what they are. And so it's in a way, it's almost a little less mechanistic. It's almost a little more mystical, the way these prayers play out in the Western liturgy.
From a certain
But
point of
that,
view, for sure.
yeah, but that's just an aside. That's not to, it's just to bring a corrective to some misunderstandings. But in the
Of course,
Western
but like you
liturgy,
understand that people that take part in those kind of polemics are not approaching the subject sincerely. So I mean,
sure, right, exactly. So but the Western liturgy is it's a sore it's emphasizing Christ as mediator, taking us up, even in the epiclesis, taking us up to heaven. In the Eastern liturgy, the emphasis is more on Christ, the divine logos coming down from heaven. And this is even reflected in the architecture, the soaring verticality of the Gothic architecture, which basically is born out of the Western Mass, of the prayers themselves, eventually, as she sort of comes into her own. Now, I have a really important question for you.
tell me.
It's kind of a rhetorical question, but which one's right?
Both.
Exactly.
Both.
So in our Orthodox apologetics, we say this is the Eastern understanding and way and experience. Ergo, this over here is not Orthodox. That's that's what we say all the time.
I I think okay, I'm gonna make a really like kind of Disney movie-ish statement here. I think people are scared of what they don't know about. Or they're scared of the unknown.
Yeah.
And I think who was I having this conversation with? I think yeah, actually it was last night. It was with Father Justin Slaughterdoty's it's a gentleman that goes to his church. We were talking and he was telling me about in his studies into the Byzantine interactions with the Latins, you know, he used this as an example. He was like, here's a representative of the papacy, and then here's a monk from Mount Athos or whatever. And they talk to each other. And you have the translator there, a Greek to Latin translator. And the Latin priest looks and says, okay, well, when we say this, we mean this. And then the Greek hears that and he was like, well, wait, by that, do you mean this? And it's like, okay, like, everybody's talking over each other in their
Yeah.
particular languages.
Right.
And I feel like in a lot of ways, we're talking over each other in our architecture and in our liturgics and in our so on and so forth. And I feel like this is where a lot of the disconnect comes from when and as a result, I think it's easier for us to just kind of throw the big cannonball word of heresy at each other.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where a lot of the interconnectivity gets lost,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
shouldn't be the case,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, I think that's true. And we just have to be, so what's the solution? Humility, right?
And love,
Um,
of
yeah,
course. And
humility and
gentleness.
love and
Gentleness is in short order these days.
being patient with one another and learning and trying not to, pontificate, which is one of my favorite things to say to my Orthodox brethren who don't like the Pope. I've never heard anybody pontificate more than Orthodox people online, making all these pronouncements, about this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, our church has never said that consensually. Like, that's your opinion,
Huh.
which is fine. Everybody's got an opinion, but don't state it as like fact. So,
It's fact to them, It's like things are facts to the particular in a funny
yeah,
way like
yeah,
that.
yeah. But we have to be responsible about that, I think, and be more careful and show a little more humility when we're
Certainly.
making pronouncements about things, especially things that we don't really know much about. Um,
Certainly.
I mean, I say that as a repentant sinner because Lord knows I did enough of that, and I probably still do it from time to time. I pray to God to convict me when I do, but I swore off of that years ago because that's what I used to do. I used to run off at the mouth. I'd read a little something in a book, and then I would develop, and say all this stuff. That was a long time ago, but that's what I repented of, and I've been trying
Oh, everybody does
best
that. I think it
not to do
lessens
that.
with age and lessens with the fire of, I guess, youth and ambition and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah.
But so, okay, please forgive me. I completely forgot where we were in your personal story.
Oh well, yeah. So 10 years in the CEC, and are you going to break this up into two
Oh
different?
no, we're running this all the way through. Listen to me.
Oh my
I
God.
did I did a podcast with a priest at Bessemer, Alabama, my dear spiritual father, one of many, because again,
Uh,
I'm a cheat. And we did first time what happened was that my in-laws came over through my sister's fiance. And we had to cut it short. Second one, because the Wi-Fi in Greece is garbage, the
yeah,
internet cut off. So
yeah.
we had those two recordings, then we finished it off with a third one, pieced it together, and it was 4.5 hours long. And I was like,
Oh
man,
my
this is
Lord.
great. And man, I love talking to him. And you're like him in that way. This
That's
is a
funny.
fantastic conversation.
That's
So,
funny. Well,
um,
so we went we were in the CEC for 10 years, and once again the CEC kind of did an about face and said we're done with this journey to apostolic Christianity. We're our own thing. We're not a bridge. We're not going to Orthodoxy, nothing, so I'm like, okay, this is it. So I was serving under Bishop, the second bishop in the CEC. The CEC had grown from very small, three
what is the
churches to
CEC? I'm sorry.
Charismatic Episcopal Church.
Okay, gotcha.
And so they grew to about 500,000 people worldwide, who were, again, basically evangelical charismatics looking for, apostolic Christianity. But when it became clear that they had really, in my view, forsook that pursuit, and pulled up short, I talked to my bishop and I'm like, I think it's time. We're going to become Orthodox. And he said, yeah, well, I'm leaving too. And he said, but I always promised that I would never split the church. So you make your announcement first. And so we were the first church to actually leave the CEC. There sort of was an exodus after that. And so we
Does
stood
it
up.
exist anymore?
It does exist. They've kind of reinvented themselves a little bit, but it does still exist.
Okay.
So we stood up. The bishop stood up and said, Father Patrick's going to be going to Orthodoxy. If any of you want to explore that with him, feel free. And he made an announcement the next week that he was leaving, and he ended up becoming Roman Catholic.
Okay.
So we had about 43 people from the church there who said, we want to go with you, and we want to explore this becoming Orthodox. So I called Father Peter Gilquist up, and again, I had been involved in Orthodoxy.
Legendary
Yeah,
priest.
well, I've known him for years. I had been very involved in a lot of Orthodox circles for 20 years, even though I wasn't Orthodox.
He was the spearhead
So
of the Campus Crusader stuff, wasn't he?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And one of our deacons is one of the original ordinands from that group.
No kidding.
Yeah, so I have all the inside scoop and stories that they went through, and he's a really good friend of
Hey,
mine.
listen, after we get off the phone, if you have free time, check out episode 11 of our podcast
Yeah,
where Father Dave Hovick was super involved in that. He took a whole parish with him into the
okay.
into the Antiochians. Yeah, it
Oh
was
yeah,
sweet.
I'll check it out. So I called Father Peter up and I said, okay, we're ready. You've been putting up with me talking to you for years now. We're finally ready. We're doing it. We're coming in the church, God willing. So he said, okay, well, the Bishop Thomas he's the bishop in your diocese, and he'll be up at Antiochian Village on such and such a date. I'll call and let him know. Go up there and talk to him, and I'll let him know you're coming. So we, six or seven of us, got in a van and we drove up there, and we piled out of our van and we walked in, and they're in the dining hall, and there's like 200 priests there. I think it was Archdiocesan Convention or something. So somebody points me to Bishop Thomas, and he's sitting back at the back table. And I walk up to him. The first thing I said to him was, I said, Your Grace, we're not here kicking tires. We're banging on the door. We want in the church. Tell us what to do. That's the first thing I said to him, which is, I didn't know him from Adam, but I was the truth, and I just was speaking from my heart. And come to find out that was the right thing to say to Bishop Thomas. I mean, we're dear friends now. I love Bishop Thomas, and he became such an important part of our life. And so he's like, all right, sit down here. And he began to talk to us. And there's a priest there. He said, I want you to get these people catechized and get them on the track. And I mean, he doesn't let any grass grow under his feet. Bishop Thomas doesn't. I don't know if you know him, but he's wonderful. So he's actually moving to your fair city soon. So
No kid. Maybe
yeah.
I've spoken to him on occasion. Give me his number. I'll get him on for an interview.
Oh
God willing.
yeah,
We'll see.
definitely you should. He's great. So he says to me, he says, "Do you want to be Western Rite or Eastern Rite?" And I said, "Santa," or I said, "Your Grace, we just want to be
Sand.
Orthodox. We just want to be." I didn't know the term at the time, Sadna, but I said, "We just want to be Orthodox. We'll do whatever you tell us to do. You tell us what to do, we'll do it. We just want to enter the church." And there's a priest there next to him who's passed away now, who was kind of like a grandfather to me over the years. I used to meet with him all the time, and he's whispering in Bishop Thomas's ear, "Don't let him be Western Rite. Don't let him be Western Rite." Bishop Thomas
Mm.
Bishop Thomas told me this later, laughing. And this is a dear, he was a dear man, and he was one of the old dinosaurs of the archdiocese. Anyway, he wanted us to end up at his church, I think, but don't let him be Western Rite. So, and Bishop Thomas is like, pushing him away, stop, be quiet. And he said, "Well, go visit. I want you to take your group, y'all pray, go visit 4 or 5 churches for 3 months, go around and come back. You tell me what you want to do, and I'll bless it." So we did that. We went through a lot of soul searching, and we prayed, and it was not an easy decision. And I was, to be honest, I mean, I didn't have like any romantic or emotional attachment to the Western Rite. I grew up Baptist. And yes, I had been in the CEC. We're basically using kind of a Western liturgy to speak, so to speak. But it wasn't like I was like completely wed to it. To be honest, I had read and studied much more about the Byzantine, the Eastern Rite. I had been to more liturgies, and that was, I had loved it, and the prayers and the hymns and everything. And so it was really difficult because I was afraid that maybe we were going to be losing something or giving something up or settling for second best. And I was also really afraid that we'd be treated like, the redheaded stepchildren of Orthodoxy. And like, I'm like, finally, we're entering the church after all these years. We're finally coming into the church, and we're going to be like second class citizens. And that was really, really hard.
That's got to feel
So
rough. If the,
it
the
was,
the
it was
sentiment of it.
it was tough to make that decision, but nevertheless, we felt strongly after a lot of prayer that that's what God was calling us to do, and that we could be part of the solution and not part of the problem, and sort of, to live in that way was an act of love and everything. So to restore this culture to the church, and so we did it. So we went back and said, no, we feel like we want to be Western Rite. He said, okay. So we went through catechism, and we were preparing for our chrismations. And a week before we were chrismated, and this is an important part of my story, and I've told this before, so I apologize if others have heard this already. But week before the catechism or our chrismation, I'm waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks, like at 2 in the morning. I've never had a panic attack in my life. I'm waking up in a cold sweat, screaming, right? Screaming
Hmm.
and freaking out. My wife's like, "What is the matter with you?" I'm like, "I'm fine, I'm fine. I don't know what's the matter." So I get up, I pace on the floor. I'm all upset. I'm anxious, and and it's not about becoming Orthodox. I'm so excited about becoming Orthodox. It's about being Western Rite, because this decision, like they made it clear, Bishop made it clear, like, "I don't want you switching back and forth. You can't switch them back and forth. You got to make a decision and stick with it." And I'm like, "Okay." And we really feel like this is what God's calling us to
And did
do.
you know? And like at this point, like I know you're definitely not a stupid person, but it's like, I mean, you knew about enough about each at these point to kind of distinct and
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, oh yeah, 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 I knew enough. I knew quite a bit. Um, so, but I was just afraid. It was this anxiety about like what this was going to mean, and like I said, about finally entering the church and then maybe not being received or supported by my brothers, and I don't know, just and missing out on something. So every night I had this panic attack for 2 or 3 or 4 nights. I can't remember. And I get up and pray, and nothing, nothing, nothing. It's just like nothing. I'm just like stressed, anxious, upset. So like I don't know, a few nights later, I get up, same thing every night. I get up, panic attack. I'm like, "Lord, I need something. I need something. I need to know that we're doing the right thing. I'll do whatever you want us to do. I don't care what we have to go through. I don't care what we have to suffer. I don't care what it means." It's funny. People accuse us of taking the easy way out. Ah, So dumb. Like, I have no idea. We did not take the easy way. We took
I
the
mean,
hard
being the
way.
cultural minority and already one of the smallest Christian denominations globally is, I don't think that's
Yeah.
considered easy, but
No, we get accused of so much stuff that is so, it's just balderdash. Anyway, that doesn't matter. I don't pay any attention to it, but it was not the easy way out. So, so I'm up, I'm praying, I'm like, Lord, I need something, I need something. And I start to see in my soul, like in my mind's eye, I see kind of into the darkness, like, and it's not evil darkness, it's the darkness of unknowing. You said you're reading Dionysius. It's the darkness of unknowing. And I'm peering into this darkness, and it's like my eyes are seeing through the darkness for a very long way away, miles and miles and miles, 1,000 miles away. And deep into this darkness, I see, and there's all this, I'm not, it's just happening to me. I see a slight little flicker, like a flame, or it's so small. I mean, maybe it's just an ember, a tiny little ember or flicker or something. And I see it, and I felt like I heard the Lord say to me, "That's all you're getting."
mm, mm,
That's all you're getting. I knew what it meant. I knew what it meant. It meant that this is the flat, this is my call to you. I'm calling you to this. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. Like, this is what you've been called for. And he said, but that's all you're getting. And I remember what I said back. And I said, it's enough, Lord. It's enough, Lord. And I was at peace. And no more panic attacks. We went into our chrismations, and we were happy, and we felt confident, and I felt confident that we had made the right decision. And so we were chrismated. I was eventually made a priest pretty quickly, actually, because of my whole past experience and the need of the parish. And so I was ordained a deacon and then a priest. And we're serving the liturgy, and things are going great. The church is doing well, and we're growing and we're learning. But there was one more conversion that I want to tell you about that happened 3 years later, maybe 2.5 years later.
okay.
I think I was still struggling with kind of letting go, like being fully Western, like really completely embracing the Western tradition and patrimony. And I still kind of wanted to have my cake and eat it too. And I think I became aware that I was sitting above the liturgical patrimony or the Western patrimony, and I was sort of like above it, and I was controlling it, and I was like, maybe I can like create. This wasn't conscientious, but kind of like create my own version of things of a Western Rite Orthodox Church that's Eastern Rite or something. I don't know how to explain it. And it's not like we were blending or doing a bunch of stuff, but it was just I was wrestling with that issue. And if Christ had appeared to me in those 2 years, and if he had held the liturgicon in one hand and the Western altar missal in the other hand and said, choose, I don't care which one you choose, just choose, I would have hesitated for a moment. I would have picked the Western Rite Missal, but I would have hesitated. Okay. So it was almost like I had a girl on the side, right? It's like I had a mistress. So, and it was the Byzantine Rite. And I I realized, I came to the realization that it was kind of I was prideful. I was being prideful, that I was putting myself in a position that wasn't mine to be in. It was really a position of the Holy Spirit, because I believe that the Latin patrimony is holy tradition, capital T tradition, and is part of the work of the Spirit. So I think to denounce it, I'm going to say something really blunt, but I think it's blasphemous to denounce it. So I think people are questions about it. That's fine. You can have your questions, but I would just caution my brothers to not denounce something that could be a work of the Holy Spirit. Be very careful not to do that,
There
because
there
that could
needs
be
to be
blasphemous.
exposure and education, I think. I
Yeah.
think for
Well,
this, but
in the
yeah.
meantime, just be cautious.
Yeah.
And
One
that's
word
my
less is
advice.
best. And if we're, for the Greeks who may have anything to say about the Western Rite, listen to Saint Joseph the Hesychast and the Colevades fathers and just.
Right.
Silence is a
Yes.
work of the Holy Spirit.
Yes, I agree. So anyway, so basically, I realized what I was doing, that I had put myself in a position above the Latin patrimony and the liturgical tradition, and I still felt that sort of tension in my life, even though we were generally happy and things were going well. But as soon as I became aware that that's what I had done, I repented of that. I said, I'm sorry, that was wrong, that's prideful, that's arrogant. I'm going to submit myself to the Latin tradition and patrimony and give my life to it and devote myself to it wholeheartedly. And when I did that, something happened. Like I can't explain it. I had an actual conversion experience. I mean, it was like I fell in love with the Latin rite and the Latin patrimony, like you fall in love with a girl. Like, I mean, madly, head over heels in love, like overnight. And
That's how I feel about the Greek monastic tradition. This
yeah,
is the same kind of, you
yeah,
know.
I just and that happened. So that happened back in like 2008, and since then, um, that whole the entire sort of issue or problem of East West, of all these questions about what does it mean to be Catholic Orthodox, of what is our task and our mission in the West, of understanding the different aspects of theology and the expression of theology, of even the atonement, for example, and the way that it's impacted our liturgical life and tradition. Things just started opening up for me. And I began to, like we were talking earlier, you said things falling into place.
Yeah.
And you start to see things. It was really from that moment that things really started to become more clear. And from that day till today, I have become my passion, my love for this mission and for building up the church with this, this in this way, along with my brothers, in the Eastern Rite. We're all on the same side. We're all working towards the same ends. Has grown exponentially stronger every day. I mean, it has not waned at all. And I've just become more and more convinced in the value of it and the necessity, I would say the necessity of it. Because I think if we're going to truly express the fullness of our faith and our Catholic orthodoxy, we have to reclaim and breathe life into this Latin patrimony. I think it's essential.
I think it's time for the $1 million golden question. Because we've been talking for a while about this, but I think we need to provide some more context. What is the Western Rite and why does it exist? What is it?
Well, it's the Latin patrimony in her liturgical life and culture, and also in other ways that has kind of impacted culture in the West, both in literature and language and music um, and the way that she reflects on the mystery of Christ's salvific work and architecture and iconography and it's all the ways, but it stems primarily from the liturgical culture that then has impacted the rest of culture. Like we said, religion is the basis of culture, and the
Hmm.
liturgy, the cult, really impacts greatly a culture. And so, it's the belief that the work of the Holy Spirit in the West among Saint Gregory and Saint Patrick and Saint Benedict and Saint Ambrose and Hilary and the different lands um, is of inestimable value in terms of bringing a full orbed, uh, you know, binocular, that's my sort of metaphor. It's like
Hmm.
two-eyed vision, a binocular vision of the great mystery of our faith and of our orthodoxy. And it's sort of the belief and the value that without the Latin patrimony, that we as the Orthodox, as the Eastern Orthodox, we certainly, that doesn't mean we're not the church. It doesn't mean that we don't possess the fullness of the faith, but in some way we are poorer, that we are poorer for having lost connection with a vibrant living expression of the Latin patrimony, and that it's sort of like seeing out of one eye, so to speak. I mean, I can see perfectly out of one eye. I can make out all of the details of your face, not a problem. But it does sort of change my perspective. It reduces my depth perception and my perspective from looking at it both eyes.
Yeah.
And so, we have to be careful about how we talk about this because I'm not saying that Eastern Orthodoxy is deficient, so to speak, but it is poorer. And let me put it this way.
It's not the full breadth of everything Orthodoxy once was
Yeah. Yes.
globally.
And let me put it in the most succinct way I can. Is the Eastern Orthodox Church the fullness of the faith? Yes. Um, what's the problem with the Eastern Orthodox Church having lost a vibrant, living expression of the Latin patrimony? It's not okay.
Yeah.
It's
I
just
I
be,
know I think that's a good justification. It's just bad to let something like that die.
it's
I
not
don't think
okay.
yeah.
It's like my Baptist grandmother. She says, Patrick, I understand you're Orthodox. Can I be saved and go to heaven if I'm not Orthodox? Okay, I would answer yes, emphatically. And I don't want to get into this big controversy, but I would answer yes. And then she would say, well, then why do I need to be Orthodox? And I would say, because it's not okay. So this is profound. It doesn't sound profound, but it is profound. Can you live the life of a debaucherous murderer and in your dying breath be saved?
Yes.
Thief on the cross.
Exactly.
Is that okay? Like, is that
No.
your aspiration?
No, it's a yeah.
No,
Sometimes things kind of pan out that way, but at the same time,
it's not okay. We don't hold the thief. We love the thief on the cross, Saint Dismas. We love
Santi's
him because
Mass,
of the
yeah.
of the mercy of God, but we don't hold him up as the model.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
it's not like God saying, "Okay, this is if you choose, this is one good way to make it in." No, so no, we need the full orbed Catholic Orthodoxy, and we're now in the West, and we're vibrantly in the West, and we have to reclaim our Catholicity, and this is not just a matter of like speaking Latin or genuflecting. It has to do with more substantial stuff than that. We're talking. That's why I brought up the liturgy, the actual understanding of Christ's atoning work of the mystery of salvation, the Latin fathers and the Latin liturgy too. It's not just reading some books, it's our prayer life. They express a perspective that the East doesn't, that fills out the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so it needs to be restored to us. And Florovsky said this. I mean, I don't understand people sort of misuse Florovsky, with his patristic synthesis. I mean, he was pretty clear that a patristic synthesis without the Latin patrimony is not a full orbed orthodoxy. I mean, that was the whole point of part of what he was saying. He was writing a book before he died on the atonement specifically, and he used the term atonement, which is, that's a lightning rod term with some Orthodox. It's a great term, I think. But the chapter titles for the book were all in Latin from the Latin liturgy.
You would be a candlestick on the internet if you just said stuff, just throwing that word around specifically atonement. We'll talk about it after the podcast because I do want to talk to you about some stuff.
Yeah,
But okay, a couple lightning rod question. So when you guys do your cross, is it like this or like how do you
I get asked
do?
that question all the time. You're not going to like my answer.
Okay.
Somebody asked me this the other day, and I gave them my answer, and they refused to accept it. They just kept pestering me. My answer was, I don't care.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
So
works.
I don't care. So, and I answer it that way on purpose because I really don't care. I don't think it matters. So to answer the question, I make the sign of the cross like this
Okay.
most of the time. But the only reason I do that is not because I'm thinking there's anything right about it. It's just because that's what 20 years before I became Orthodox, I was like all my training was in Eastern Rite Orthodoxy liturgically before I became Orthodox. And that's how I learned how to, as a Baptist, I didn't make the sign of the cross. That's how I learned how to make the sign of the cross.
Yeah, I know the now
But
recently universally canonized Saint Olga. There was a very controversial for some reason icon of her doing her cross like this and
yeah,
like that's how yeah. So you
so
saw that before,
sometimes I do leave my hand open.
right?
I always go right to left just out of habit. But
Mm-hmm.
I leave my hand open about half the time, and I do this about half the time. So I really don't care. I think we make too much out of that. So that this is a sign of the Holy Trinity and two natures of Christ. So is this sign, or this is the sign of the actual cross? A sign conveys the essence of a thing. This sign, I'm not sure, conveys the essence of the Holy Trinity. This sign certainly does convey, through prayer and faith, the substance and essence of everything the cross stands for. So this is a little
What
more
does this mean? What does this mean?
the five wounds of Christ.
Ah,
So
okay.
tell me that's not meaningful when you're making the sign of the cross.
It is. That's
It's
interesting.
very
I had no
meaningful.
idea. Yeah, I didn't know
It's
that.
beautiful. Like, what's more meaningful? Oh, we making the sign of the cross, the five wounds of Christ. It's so I, I don't care.
I'm
I,
learning. I'm learning,
yeah,
and I think
no, but this is the
yeah.
kind of thing that people go on and on about on the internet about what makes you Orthodox or not Orthodox. So, I get this question asked to me, my own parishioners all the time, and it's a little awkward because I'm just like, I don't really care. So I think most of our people probably do go from right to left and probably do hold their hand like this, but I go from right to left, and I would say about 50% of the time I kind of have an open hand, and 50% of the time I have my hand like this.
Right.
So
So what is here's an okay, I feel bad that I'm asking you this stuff because like some of this stuff you could probably get some of this stuff is already like kind of
no, it's
similar
okay. Ask
to
whatever you want. It's fine.
so what is the deal from doing it like I guess like left to or whichever the opposite way.
Yeah,
Wait.
I have
Okay,
no,
wait, left to right.
right.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea. There's people online who everybody's got an opinion about why they say, well, the Catholics changed it. This is the ancient way. And I'm so disinterested in this question that I've never even bothered to read one article on
Oh, okay.
it. I, I, I have a very large library, and I
Right.
read lots and lots of books. I probably spent 60 hours reading this last week because I've been sick. Um, and I could care less. Like, I've never even looked into it.
As far as the Eucharist is concerned, do you guys do leavened or unleavened?
Leavened.
Leavened.
Yes.
From a chalice or on the hand? I'm not.
We dip the host. We call it
Okay.
intinction. We dip the host in the precious blood, and then we put it on their tongue.
Okay, I see. Okay. Yeah. This is okay, so it's like there's elements of both existing within this.
Yeah. So they
Okay.
get they partake of both the body and blood of Christ, and but we use our hand and we put it place it. They open their mouth and we put it on their tongue.
Okay, kneeling.
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 They don't
Okay.
have to kneel, but that's our tradition. That's
Sure.
typical. That's standard.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
you mentioned like the little bar that kind of sits
yeah,
right
we have
there
an
while
altar. We
you're
have an altar rail, and we do all kinds of things at the altar rail. We pass out candles on Candlemas. We pass out palms on Palm Sunday. They come up for prayers. So that altar rail is just like a really integral part of our sort of spiritual life and piety.
and you're chanting. I'm assuming it's closer to like the
Gre-
Roman Catholic than
Gregorian. Yeah,
Gregorian
we
chant. Okay.
we use Gregorian chant. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we sing everything. We sing the Psalms. It's all in ancient Gregorian chant. But we do have some like other hymnography and things that we sing. And this is not strictly liturgical. It's sort of like getting in a church and coming out, like while people are receiving communion, we'll sing some hymns and that sort of thing. And so we're permitted to sing whatever's theologically and musically appropriate
Okay.
in that hymnography.
That makes sense.
So
I'm trying to think of other differences. Architecture, we talked about how things are very Gothic, vertical.
they don't have to
Um,
be Gothic. I mean, our current church is more Romanesque,
okay.
but we're hoping to build a new church, and we want to build a Gothic church. But yes, I mean, but Gothic is perfectly acceptable, and not only acceptable. I think architecturally it expresses, as we were talking about, this sort of verticality of the mass of the sacrifice being taken.
Pointing towards the heavens.
Yeah,
If yeah.
yes, going up, you know, we're going up, heaven's coming down, the ascension, we're raised with Christ, we're seated with him now in heavenly places, so there's an emphasis both ways. There neither is right, one's not right or wrong. They're both different kind of ways of talking about our union with God.
And when did I guess at least I mean I don't even know if this started in the United States, but when did I guess in the story of the Western Rite bishops and people start to become interested to revive this tradition into the Orthodox
Yeah.
faith?
Yeah, so there is on the orthodoxwest.com is a website that I run, and there's some, if somebody wants to read a little bit more, there's a lot of stuff
I'll
in
link
there.
it down in the description. People will be
There
checking out.
there's a
And actually, I have an Arabic friend that was texted because I was looking at my phone very rudely as you were talking a little bit earlier. My Arabic friend texted me, and I was telling him I was interviewing you, and he said that you run a Spotify page of Western music, and it like makes him cry. It's so beautiful. And I was like,
yeah.
okay, well, we'll talk about that
Yeah,
as
we
well.
have, yeah, we're very blessed with a beautiful choir in our parish, and we've produced, I think, 4 albums now. So, but if somebody wants to read a little bit more intensely, there's 2 articles that give the history of the Western Rite, and so they could read that. But back in the mid 1800s, there was some interest from some Roman Catholic priests and bishops who approached the Orthodox world and said, we want to be Orthodox, but we want to retain our venerable and liturgical tradition. And the Orthodox patriarchs and bishops began to look at this request, and they said, well, why not? If we're the Catholic faith, that means we embrace this as part of our Orthodox heritage and history. It belongs to us.
And the
So
Greeks and the
why
Russians were all involved in like
yeah, so
figuring this out.
so at some point, every major patriarchate addressed this and said, at least in theory, yes, the Eastern Orthodox Church should be considering rehabilitating or reinvigorating or accepting back or the Latin rite and Latin patrimony. So this went through a lot of different iterations, and there were starts and stops, but it was continuously addressed and brought to different patriarchs. And then in the early 1900s, Saint Tikhon, who was here, he was approached by some Episcopalians who also posed the same question, and he took the question back to the Moscow Synod. They studied it for 5 years, and they said, yes, yes, we approve this, and so they began to receive parishes in. At one point in France, I believe all of the Orthodox in France were Western Rite at one point. St. John Maximovich celebrated the Western Rite liturgy. He consecrated bishops. He ordained priests. He was a big supporter. And in 1950s, Metropolitan Anthony Bashir basically established, with the approval of the Patriarchate of Antioch, the Western Rite Vicariate and the Antiochian Archdiocese. And that was probably the most, the we have the strongest, most organized, well-established, healthiest, kind of vicariate. We call it a vicariate.
Western Rite
Western
orientation,
Rite,
yeah.
yes. And that's been since the 1950s. And so it's been the most stable since then. But there are arguments that there's always been a Latin Rite being celebrated within the Orthodox world. Um,
There was a
you know,
Benedictine monastery on Mount Athos that
yeah,
closed not too long ago.
yeah, a ruling monastery, in
Yeah.
fact. And yeah, there's a whole history there. In Cyprus to this day, there's about 60 churches that are still in existence with a Latin and a Greek Byzantine altar next to each other.
Oh, you would love my island. So I originally hailed from Kalinos, which my entire family does, except for my father's father, from Gefira. And on our island, most of the larger churches, actually even some of the smaller ones, are very Latin in a lot of ways. The
Yeah.
iconography, the what's the thing called where the guy goes up and he reads, either the gospel or chants on it. It's like a
Yeah.
separate thing off to the side with a spiral staircase, and
Yeah,
there's
it's
like
an
a
ambo.
the ambo.
Ambo.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All the big churches in Kalymnos have ambos.
Really interesting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like
Cool.
and beautiful, beautiful church architecture. Looks
Yeah.
very Eastern on the outside, looks very Western on the inside. It's
Yeah.
it's it's
That's
funny,
interesting.
but it's
Yeah.
beautiful celebrating liturgy stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think when people start doing a little investigation, they realize that a lot of the dichotomies that have been sort of played out in modern Orthodox apologetics are really misguided and actually just not that all. A lot of them are not accurate, both theologically and even historically. I mean, iconostasis is came into being much later, for example. It's just not an ancient thing. Um, so like you said, just education and getting, but being open-minded, and part of those polemics probably come, I don't want to go psychoanalyzing people, but probably come out of a certain insecurity and fear. We are passionate about trying to convince people that they should be Orthodox, right? I mean, we believe that. We believe this is the most healthy place for them. This is the fullness of the faith. And so we're going to set about trying to find a way to be effective in doing that. And I just came to the belief years ago that we needed to be more accurate and more responsible and not slander, misrepresent, and that first of all, it was sinful to do that, but second of all, in the long run, it's not even effective. And I really believe that because, and this really gets to the point. When we're talking about missions, this is something I truly, truly believe, and this is somewhat anecdotal, but it's from my own experience. We get excited because 10 people convert, like 10, 20 people convert this year to our church to Orthodoxy. And we're like, look at this, we're growing, we're doing great. Look how exciting this is. What we don't see is the 1,000 people that came and looked in the window, but when they heard all of our sort of polemical, sort of anti-Western stuff that they knew was actually not true, like was a misrepresentation of facts, they walked away.
That's
So
tragic.
we can look at the 10 that converted and not see the 1,000 that walked away. And I really like this is not just a hypothesis. I know this for a fact. I mean, I personally know, of many, many, many people. And there have been even large jurisdictions and organizations that were very orthodox in their theology, and there wouldn't have been any kind of theological hindrance to them becoming orthodox, but because they had to, become Russian or whatever it was, they couldn't make the leap. And we lost them. I mean, I talk to these people all the time, monasteries, it's sad. I mean, we're going to bear responsibility for that, I think, before God. And I think that, another sort of self-critique goes along with kind of maybe how our sort of on certain kinds of an asceticism could produce a sort of individualism. Um, I think another thing is that we um, sometimes we don't have a robust enough vision for missions. I mean, and this was the sin of Israel. I mean, this is their great sin. Judaizing tendencies, and that God Yahweh was for Israel and not for the nations. And that is potentially our greatest sin. And if we don't get serious about embracing our mission to bring everybody into the church and to go out and reach them where they are, and baptize what we need to baptize, I think we're going to be held responsible for that. I think that's a very serious thing. I had a friend in Canada who's in a particular jurisdiction. Canada's a big country. He said he was one of only 3 in the entire jurisdiction that had an English language church.
Wow.
One of 3 in the whole jurisdiction. And he said they don't care. They say we're not here to bring Canadians into the faith. We're here to minister to our people. And I've been in Britain. I was in Britain this last year. God willing, I'm hoping to go in a couple of weeks again for an event over there. I talked to a lot of priests there, and they said a lot of I mean,
Do you know
there's
Father
some,
Jacob Siemens?
I do. Well, no, I
Yes.
don't know him, but I know who he is, and
He's
I want to get to know him. Actually, I would love to get to know him.
fantastic priest. We did an episode with
Yeah.
him, and yeah.
Yes, yes. So I'm interested in him actually. So, but a lot of the priests told me it's tragic. They said there's some mission mindedness there in Britain, and there's some priests and bishops doing a really good job and have a real passion. But a lot of the orthodoxy there's not a vision for really bringing those people to Christ and the church. It's really about just serving, their group, and I it really scandalizes me,
Well, if you
honestly.
if you keep up with the grapevine, and I'm not gonna say it like kind of openly, but there's some ecclesiastical complications there that have everybody kind of preoccupied, and it's like,
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
but, um, I take things. I learned when I stopped thinking about things so much and worrying about them, God usually kind of fills in the gaps. So I think God's
yeah,
will prevail
yeah,
in this way in people's hearts and in the growth of his ministry and its I guess articulations into the world in
yeah.
its forms. And I think
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, but yeah, that was
Well, I mean, ultimately his will prevail. In the meantime, there's many instances where his will is not prevailing. Um, but but I think that's important for me to say that because some people can get discouraged and want to give up or say, well, then what's the use? Or this is all a sham. That's the devil getting to you. Those are lies from the devil. Look, the reality is, and I'm all about dealing with truth and reality and facing it without insecurity. There are many, many times where God's will is not prevailing. Okay.
yeah.
Like, I mean, in a particular situation, but what are you going to do? Does that mean like you give in to despair? You become discouraged? You give up the fight? You quit? You get out of the boat? No, like that's not an option. You suffer. That's what you like,
Which is a crown in heaven in of itself. So you never really lose.
yeah, he said, you're going to be killed and cast out of the synagogue, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. He said, there's tares and wheat that are going to grow up in the church together, and we're like, but Lord, how can this be? Well, let's go pull the tares. He says, no, 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 let them grow. We're not going to pull the tares, not to the end of the age. We need to come to grips with this as a reality that of our faith and of our Christianity, and we can't get resentful about it, and we can't despair over it. We got to toughen up. We live in a snowflake culture, right?
Yeah, the stuff. I
And
haven't heard that term since like 2018, but yeah,
I know. Well, I'm not really a political guy, but it's a good term.
it's
So
fun.
everybody knows what I mean by it. So,
Sure.
we live in a victimized snowflake culture. Sort of the virtue of courage is sort of not accentuated enough in our world, in our Christian world, in our Orthodox world. We need to be talking more about this instead of just sort of like pretending like these tragic things aren't happening. No, they're happening. They're happening.
I
And
don't know where the courageous went, man, because it's like I'm a little bit mean sometimes, admittedly, but it's like, man, like God gave you teeth to pull them out sometimes, you know?
yeah,
It's one of those
yeah,
things.
we got to toughen up a little bit. I mean, I think how can you be a Christian in this world if you don't have some grit
And some
and,
fighting you,
and
yeah.
some fight? You got to. I just read Beowulf, I was like, man, I was like, yes. Actually, I assigned this to one of my spiritual children that I'm dealing with, and I sent them a text, and I'm like, go buy Beowulf. This is the best translation and read it. They sent me back an emoji with a scowling face, and they're like, I'm like, just do it. you know, because like the messaging in there, the toughness, the grit, God has called me to, to go and slay the dragon,
Yeah,
and he dies at the end of the book. The dragon kills him, but he kills the dragon,
yeah,
you know, and this is life in this world. This life in this world, this is we experience the joy and the peace of the kingdom of God. We receive the divine body and blood of Christ. We have the Holy Spirit. All of this is true. And I'm generally a happy person and I feel the joy of God in my life. But at the same time, there's a certain permeation of melancholy in this world. And it's not going away. This is life in this world.
that
So
comes with the physicality of this body and this earth.
well, yeah, I mean, we've got 2 feet. We got a foot in both worlds, a foot in the corrupt world, a foot in the world to come. And basically, I think that the metaphor for this life and this corrupt life or this, finite life is Babylon. So in the Old Testament, we're basically in Babylon. They were in Babylon for 70 years. 70 years is basically, that's a life, in the Old Testament
Yeah,
symbolism. 70 plus 10 if you're lucky. So 80. But that says that in the Psalm. So 70 years is a
Unless you're
life.
Adam or his kids antediluvian, because they got to
Right.
stick around for a while. But
But Babylon, this life in this world is kind of like Babylon. We hung up our harps and wept. And there's a certain sense in which we get to experience the peace and the joy of the Holy Spirit and the kingdom of God now as a foretaste through anamnesis, through a holy enchanted recollection of that which is to come, because we're eschatological people. But at the same time, we also exist in a state of kind of like a pervasive melancholy, and the Irish, that's why we all love the Irish so much, because nobody puts this melancholy to music like the Irish do.
and they're great drinking buddies at the same time. So
That's true. That's
yeah.
true. Yeah. They're the Irish wake. Everybody gets their whiskey and they pour a little bit out for the deceased and sit and reminisce in their Irish melancholy way and sing their melancholy songs. And we love that because it sort of like gives voice to our melancholy in this world. And it's pervasive. So I think
Well,
we have to kind of
you know the way Greeks handle death. After a funeral, we have the Makaria, and then
what's
by the time that comes around, everybody's so full of pasta and spanakopita to be upset, and we're just exhausted and fat and want to sleep. So,
right. So this is life, and we don't have to be afraid of facing things as they are because Christ is risen.
and we don't need to fear death itself. We've
No,
won. The battle's
Christ is
over.
risen. So we're gonna suffer. Things are gonna be tough, but we have our part to play, and we only have to worry about one thing. I have a very simple spirituality. My personal spirituality is like reduced down to one rule, one thing I'm concerned about, one thing, and that is what is pleasing to God in this situation.
Yep,
If
that's
I
all
can
it is.
figure that out, if I can figure out what's pleasing to Him, then that's it. I just do that and
WWJD.
let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah,
I don't worry about the results. You know, just do it. And as long as I
and
know
God
that
will fill
He's
in the
happy,
gaps.
as long as I know that He's happy, then I'm happy. Then that's what I care about.
I think that's something people forget in this world. It's like, and I think, I don't read many Western saints, but as far as the saints of Ioros are concerned, it's a lot of it is being in the moment, being present,
Yeah.
looking
Yep.
down at your 2 feet and whatever is 2 inches in front of it.
Right.
That's the job. And
Right.
everything
Right.
far out into the future is within the hands of the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. Live local. This goes back to our talk about community and
Yeah,
stability. You
localized
can
big time.
you can apply that same principle to kind of how you live in community.
I think this is a huge element in the mental illness epidemic,
Yeah.
People existentialize. They expand too much. We know too much, we see too much. We need to condense. We need to get back to ourselves and the local environment, the things around us. It's, everything outside of that. It's enough to drive somebody crazy. St. Paisios
Yeah.
talks about it. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
looking at me right now behind the camera. I have a little Russian icon of him, and it's beautiful. I can't remember where I got it, but he says, if, everything that happens in the world would drive me crazy if I didn't know that God would win in the end. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Too many choices too.
too much optionality. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. If you tell somebody you could do anything, you could do whatever you want, it's like they're just gonna end
Right.
up doing nothing.
Right. Exactly.
There's I forget who said it. It wasn't Joseph Campbell. I don't think it was him. It was maybe somebody commenting on him where it actually maybe it was Hero with a Thousand Faces. Maybe it's in that. How constriction and rules are the predicator of great art and great things are confined by a set of restrictions.
Yeah.
That's how we have
Yeah.
to operate.
By form. By
Yeah.
form, and
Yeah.
that the whole theology for the beauty of form, the aesthetics of form, is rooted in the incarnation, that God took form. It's the scandal of the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And
that too.
yeah, he
So,
well,
yeah, so do you have to go? Am I dragging this out too
I'm
much?
gonna have to go soon because I've got a house blessing I've got to get to, but I got a few more minutes if there's some things you want to tidy up.
So I wanted to ask, in your point of view, what does the future of the Western right look like in America, and what work still needs to be done?
Well, I don't know. you know, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not a clairvoyant. So I don't know what it looks like, but I think that it has tremendous potential to grow. I think that there's a tremendous amount of interest. And I know that there is because I get called on a weekly basis from people all over the country, not all over the country, all over the world. Um, I mean, we talk to people in Romania all the time, actually. You know, we've given several lectures.
Romanians, really?
The Romanians are very interested in the Western Rite, as are the Russians. And we've given 2 lecture series at a Romanian Orthodox seminary with professors there. The bishop came, and they're very interested and find it very intriguing and think it's important. And I get called by Eastern Orthodox people and contacted literally weekly, who maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago became Orthodox under a very anti-Western kind of sentiment and false dichotomy and polemic. And after being Orthodox for a few years, they began to question it and they began to kind of miss their own heritage and tradition and begin to ask questions. And so they reach out and we have a conversation about it all. And to be frank, I've actually talked a lot of people off the cliff. Like I've talked to a lot of people who've contacted me and said they're so upset about the anti-Western mentality within the Orthodox world that they were, you know, tempted to leave Orthodoxy. And I was the guy, I'm saying this because I get accused of being an instrument of making people not Orthodox, when just the opposite is the case. I know of so many people that have stayed in the Orthodox Church because we exist. So they've said, like, because there's room for the Western Rite within the Orthodox Church, that gives me hope that we can really reclaim our full Catholicity. And I'm going to stick it out. So that has happened many, many times. And I have people I have talked off the cliff, people that you would know their names if I told you, well-known people on the internet that called and they're like, I'm so upset and disgusted and confused. And I'm like, no, this is the church, man. Don't do it. Like the grass is not greener on the other side.
There's not even grass on the other side, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm all about building up the church, not, you know, I mean, I want to work with all my brothers to see the church grow and flourish. But it's hard because it is kind of threatening. Um, I mean, my Eastern Rite brothers, they're working hard to grow their churches and to minister to people. And we come along and we're like, hey, here's an American Western Orthodoxy that's very, you know, it's not a square peg in a round hole. It's a round peg in a round hole. It's like fits. Like we're just like, there's no self-consciousness
It's
about
succinct,
Orthodox.
yeah.
It's just very simple and easy and fluid and in terms of our life and everything. And you know, I can understand how that could be, I don't know, difficult for people like to accept. But I think it has potential to grow. I think if our bishops and our brother priests would be really supportive, vocal. I mean, they don't need to go out and start a Western Rite church or be Western Rite. I mean, just continue to do their ministry and their work in their church, but at least be supportive and vocally supportive. I think it would do a lot for Orthodoxy in America. And, you know, especially if our bishops in the Antiochian, they're very supportive. But I think if our hierarchs also caught a vision for it, that would make a big difference as well. So
Well,
it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle, but I know of literally thousands of people and groups, large groups, that were almost brought their whole group into Orthodoxy, except there was this feeling. Remember, I was telling you that sort of like those panic attacks I had, that I felt like
yes.
we weren't going to really be accepted or we weren't going to be truly seen as Orthodox. What I'm telling you is that there are large groups of people who could have easily become Orthodox, but they didn't because they gave into those fears. I know this for a fact. I've talked to them. And I'm talking large groups, like, you know, with thousands of people.
That's
And I'm
tragic.
talking about monasteries, like really good, solid, traditional monasteries that really are beautiful monasteries, Benedictine monasteries. I just spoke to one this past year and asked them, why didn't you become Western Rite Orthodox? And they said, well, because they basically we don't trust that the bishops are really supportive. Or like we don't, there's too much bad, we see the stuff on the internet. So then I have a buddy, I won't mention any names. I have a friend, a good friend who I love and respect, who talks about being very supportive of the Western Rite. But he and many others say, but it's just a drop in the bucket. It's inconsequential, right? Like doesn't really matter. It's not a real thing. So, I'm supportive, but it's inconsequential. Well,
But that remains to be seen, I think.
well,
You know.
wait a minute. Like it's a little worse than that. Talk about a backhanded compliment.
Yeah, well, I
It's
mean, you said
those
this like a
kind of
buddy of yours, like this was,
Yes, a good friend who I love and respect, but he doesn't like maybe he'll watch this. It's my it's those kinds of comments that actually are sending like this monastery away.
yeah.
So that's what they hear, even from people who are quote unquote supportive. Oh, it's a good thing in theory. These are my brothers. I know they're really serious about the faith.
Well, it ain't a
But
theory no more because there's parishes, so
well, yeah, but I mean, but
put
it's
that one in
it's
your pipe,
it's
I
it's
guess.
really it's really nothing. It's going to come out to nothing. It's really inconsequential. It has nothing to do with us. We're not really, we shouldn't be really talking about, but whatever, blah blah blah. So these people who want to become Orthodox and would enter into the church, they hear that kind of stuff and they're like, well, you know, they it gives them really pause,
Look, I completely sympathize with your frustration and kind of the chip you got as far as this is going, because if there's less Orthodox Christians because of, I guess, the dynamics of the conversations that it's having, it's like yeah, that's not a good thing.
But it's okay. I try not to have a chip about it. I'm just being frank
No, I know I'm
about it.
with you is what I'm saying. Like I get it.
It's just I understand there's a whole history. It is what it is, and it's a slow journey. So our what we're trying to do is just be faithful. We're trying to be faithful and just live out our life
Of
and
course.
try and work on our own salvation and we have a very serious Orthodox liturgical life in our community. We take it very seriously. I was talking to an Eastern Rite priest friend about last Easter, Pascha. I was telling him about our liturgical schedule for Holy Week, and he's like, "You guys spend way more time in church than the monasteries." Like, yeah, well, we're there like 8 hours a day.
Do you guys
You
call it
know,
Easter? You guys call it Easter or you call it Pascha?
both,
Both.
both, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Father,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
I I had some personal questions, but I think in spite of those, we've got a lot more insight into you and your work and your mission and the people that you're bringing into the church more than what I could have asked. So at a certain point, I this is one of the best conversations I've had on here, and I think you know that the education of this is going to reach the right people, God willingly, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Do you have any final thoughts for the audience?
Well, my pleasure. The pleasure is all mine, and I applaud what you're doing and your open-heartedness to the faith. And you're obviously serious about your faith and wanting to serve the church.
Oh, I stink.
Um,
Don't give me that much
and
credit, please.
no, no, and God bless you in all your work, and may God bless your work and everything. And I just I just want us to love one another and to forward the mission,
Oh,
together,
love is the
together.
answer. Love is the
And
answer. It comes off as this thing that you hear too much from people, and it's like
yeah,
it's never sincere. But we have to love. We have to be
yeah,
gentle.
yeah,
Like this. You know what the phronima is. You know what the real phronima is.
yeah,
And this is a very Greek element. This is a very Greek thing, not exclusive to Greeks, but Greeks pride themselves on this. This outpouring, like annoying love that is unending towards everybody around you. That
yeah,
is, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
that's something you have to do.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Right. Exactly. It's not a sort of mystical secret thing. It's just being a Christian,
Yeah.
like,
It's so that.
and
It is so that.
well, I pray that people will forgive me. I'm sure I've spoken carelessly in the past, and I've tried to repent of those things and try to be more thoughtful and loving towards people. But I've made lots of mistakes,
Oh, join the
lots of
club,
sinful
please.
mistakes, and
Yeah.
so I'm thankful for God's mercy, and I pray that my brothers and sisters in Christ will also be merciful uh, to me as I hope to be to them.
I
But
mean,
this is a moment for orthodoxy. We're in a moment for orthodoxy right now.
we
I
are.
mean, I
Oh my
think,
goodness. You're seeing
and
these articles and the
yeah,
statistics and the young men online thing
yeah,
that keeps
yeah,
getting thrown around. We're
yeah.
we're we're
So
getting there, man.
the
We
fields are
are.
white. The fields are white for harvest,
They
and
are.
we need to be supporting one another and all getting out there and picking the fruit. It's
Go get
low
a
hanging
go get a
fruit.
basket. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
thing. I'll tell you
So
one
I
really
do.
funny story. I was down in Arizona last time I was. Well, actually, you know what? I'll tell that story after. It's not like a bad story, but I'm dragging
Yeah.
this out. Father, give us a prayer so we can do the announcements and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you always. Amen.
I mean, Father, thank you so much for coming on. In our next episode, dear brothers and sisters, we are going to be talking to, where is my calendar? Um, Father Justin Slaughter. So we're still gonna have another Western Rite priest back to back. So that's gonna be good. If you would like to support Father Patrick's parish, there's gonna be a link to the website for his parish down in the description. There's also going to be a link down in the description of this for his Spotify page, which I have an endorsement from my dear friend on the internet that it is some of the most beautiful hymnography he's ever heard in his life. So please go check that out. Father, quick question. Is the website you run for the Western Rite thing and your parish website the same one?
No,
Or
they're two different websites. So St. Patrick Orthodox Church.org, and we have a YouTube channel. So if people want to see a mass or liturgy, and we have tons of YouTube, videos of our masses and various things on our YouTube channel. And but the Orthodox West is kind of the site I run for the Vicariate. And there's lots and lots of articles, and also there's some documentaries on there, and just anybody who's interested, that's the place to go and check things out.
okay, so everybody watching, there's 4 links. There's the Spotify page for the hymns. There's the Western Rite information page. There's his YouTube channel, and then there's the website for his parish, which you can go donate to. I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so check out all 4 of those. What else? I'm gonna do the same announcements I do every time. It's if you want to support the Orthochat, there's a Cash App link in the description of this that you could also check out. We have costs and we're trying to just make it through, so please feel free to contribute. If you want to support us and get something out of it, please check out Lore Coffee Roasters. We have a link to our affiliate link with them in the description. Every time you buy coffee off them, you get 15% of your purchase goes to us. We also have an affiliate deal with Scriptorum Press. So if you're getting your Orthochat affiliate coffee and you want to read your Orthochat affiliate book with it, go to scriptorumpress.com and use code OrthoChat on the checkout on their website. Don't use the Amazon. Use the website so I get something. And you get 15% off your order and 10% of it goes to us. We will be starting our lecture series on the angels, archangels, and celestial hierarchy with Archimandrite Maximus Waymar and Father Justinian Burnett coming soon. Episode 1 of the Orthochat Temple Tours is out, where we went down to Wheeling, West Virginia to check out St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church, sat down with Father Dimitri Sikoris. It's the beginning of a great series where we do documentaries on churches, talking to the parishioners, talking about the history of the building. Please go check that out. Episode 2 will be out soon after this next cycle of podcasts. Episode 1 of the Orthochat Passport, where we go internationally and we check out monasteries and churches, will be releasing soon, and our first episode is going to be checking out the monastery of Saint Sava, the New of Galimnos, and it's also, a documentary about his life. We will begin our readings of Beacons from the Bay, the life and the teachings of Saint Sebastian Dabovich, sponsored by the Scriptorum, sponsored by the Debellion Press, who is an employee for the Orthochat. Great book, great life of a saint that's been out of print for a very long time. Please go check that out. What else are we doing? Oh yeah, the Orthodox Clothing Company that's coming out, which there's gonna be some Western stuff in there too. You're gonna like that. The Stratiatis, the sister company of the Orthochat, it's going to be our Orthodox luxury streetwear company that'll be coming soon. No icons on the clothing. That's a big rule for us because people bother us about that. But and what else are we doing? What else are we doing? There's so many things happening. We're revamping the Instagram. We're revamping the Instagram to do, beautiful pictures and videos of churches with saint quotes. So if the Instagram's been a little bit boring, please go check that out. That is going to be continuously repaired as time goes on. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can check out the link in the description, or you can go to the link in our bio. The links to everything I just talked about is going to be in there. If it's released, go check it out. If it's not yet, I'm just telling you it's coming soon. And besides that, brothers and sisters, Panagia Mazisu, may our Lord Jesus Christ, His All Holy Mother, and all the saints, Eastern and Western, watch over you all the days of your lives, and we will talk to you all later.
Στους αιώνας των αιώνων αμήν. Σεν είναι πηγινός κοαιτία της αυτού. Απολύας ως φύση ο Θείος μου Υιός. Σιγάρ κατάκησε όλος τη αμαρτία. Και παρεδόθης τελείως τη ραφημία. Της εξαναστήσης εκείμενο.
Kyrie Iisus Christe eleison, 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 Kyrie Iisus Christe eleison.